I can't see anything. Oh, wow.
What is this?
I don't know.
Paper.
What? Okay. I can't see anything. Oh, wow. This now our YouTube, YouTube stream is live with me saying I cannot stream anything. Now I'm stating it again. But it's okay. We like being unproduced, Kavya. So it's like
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, no pretenses about who we are and what's going on.
we are ugly and dirty and liberated. That is, at least that's the aspiration for today. Tomorrow it might be a whole different scene, you know. So anyway, welcome to apparently episode 9. I don't know. It feels like we've done 170 episodes by now, but because we've got at least 186 ideas, I think, about what can be changed in the world. We've been thinking a lot about what we stand for, what this exercise is about. And the basic fact is essentially it's broadcast media inspired by love for beauty and love for wisdom. We think there isn't enough of either in our world. And so we wanted to create a truly public channel where the conversations we have could have happened 100 years ago or 100 years into the future. You know, the matters of eternal interest to like any civic kind of context, and also matters of beauty that you notice tenderness, you participate in life with a little bit of a gleam in your eye, a bounce in your step, a song in your heart. It's also always interesting to mix up the senses, you know. Like,
Yeah.
Anyway, but we're not going to trip out on that. So this is the 9th episode. The theme for today is prisons, broadly speaking, constraint, liberation, all of these ideas. But that's only like speaking at this level of high principle. So the first hour, we have Kavya performing Noor and I, which is a piece about Noor Inayat Khan, a British spy. We're going to see how that unfolds through Kavya's story. And as we go along in the second half, we have Isha Khandelwal, who is one of the founders of Jagdalpur Legal Aid Group. And an advocate in Bombay. We have Sahana Manjesh, who is also an advocate in Bombay. She was working with the Project 39A at NLU Delhi, studying death penalty, death row inmates for a long time. She also worked with the CHRI, doing a study of prisons across Karnataka. And we have Siddharth Sangameshwaran, who I first spoke to a couple of days ago, who's been thinking a lot about how prison can be made safe at the time of COVID, because literally any constrained space is dangerous, right? Now, the other aspiration with these episodes is that it's slightly transactional, but we want to transact in love, and which creates abundance, not scarcity, right? So the slight transaction here is that in exchange, almost for the beauty and love that's coming out of it, we suggest that you contemplate donating what you might for a nice meal at Swiggy, on Swiggy, not even at a fancy place, towards this exercise. This is a fundraiser for 3 significant causes. The first is social security for migrant workers. The second one is food security for the urban poor. And the third one is protective gear for essential care providers. And it includes like barbershops, kirana walas, everyone, because the level of caution that we need to have is extremely serious right now, right? And it's also important that like, the possibility of love is also inevitable at this time, you know, because really, like when you're staring at death, it seems like that's really the only option that you have. And it is the time that we live in, so we can't forget to be light and notice the heaviness of the moment. So I suppose it can't be anything more serious than talking about prisons today, right? So yeah, well, here we are. And Kavya, you're up. But can I just ask you before you begin, what did you think you were getting into? You've done a bunch of these Zoom things, but what is the scene? Why did you say yes?
So I think just up front, I loved what you were called, lawyers and artists, talking about law, love, and equality. I loved the idea. Everything is stuff that really resonates with me. I think I take my responsibility and my calling as an artist and a citizen very seriously, and both of those are equally important to me. So I felt like it was lovely that there was a space for both of these ideas to coexist, that there's a space where we can talk about love and talk of equality and talk of law and all of those things.
That's nice. Yeah, that's true, right? Like the thing is, you can't really separate the the world of art from the world of justice. You can't
Yeah.
separate justice from the world of art in everyday life. Mm, and you shouldn't have to either, right? There's no reason why. Mm, you've seen a poster, right? The reason why Lady Justice is on a skateboard and wearing this little cool jacket that I wish I owned, honestly, and is because like Lady Justice is fierce. She's interesting. She's curious about where society is going. She's bearing her flag and her sword in the direction of a more beautiful coexistence than the one that we have space for. So yeah,
And
so
I think
on many things. Sorry.
also as artists, we're all very preoccupied with big questions. Like the art that's made the most of an impression on me is art that's been willing to grapple with things that are bigger than just us, bigger than just our time. And I think that for me is also the intersection of these things, that uh, art is fascinated by the idea of justice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, I actually think of justice as this thing which is inevitable in any decision making context, right?
Mm.
There is no place where justice can't exist. It's like the air that you breathe. It's like, I mean, literally something, it's like the body that you wear. It's a function of every decision that you can take in the context of your coexistence. And in this case, essentially, we need to think about big questions and small questions all the time. It doesn't make sense. I don't think there's any art which doesn't ask big questions. There's no venture, no enterprise, no human enterprise which can't ask the big questions and simultaneously ask the small questions, so to say,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah, so it's a fine point that you picked up on. So anyway, it's nearly 7:15 now. I will pass it on to you because you're all waiting for Noor to come out, and we will soon recede into the background and. Yeah, we know you're going to steal some shows today, and and a lot of other emotions from our hearts. But yeah, we're looking forward to it. Um, Go for it, and then once you're done, we can chat again and have. Yeah,
Sounds good. Thank you, Badri.
you're welcome.
Hi, everybody. Good evening and welcome to Noor and I. I wrote this piece first in 2017. I've changed it, I've adapted it. I'm always playing with it. It's a story I like to remix. Um, let's begin. For the longest time, I wanted an idol, a person who could be mine. My friends all had their own growing up, this cricketer, that movie star, this Tour de France winner. But I was a Jill of all trades. Today, ballerina, tomorrow, astronaut. And finding someone who loved as many things as I did was hard. It became a sort of mission with me, looking for this role model. There were some clear criteria. First, I wanted it to be a woman. Second, I wanted it to be someone from the recent past, not from ages ago. And third, I should have conclusive evidence that this person loved the world as fiercely as I did. And for a while, it hovered at Agatha Christie as I ripped through her books quickly. I loved the murder mysteries and the archaeology. I thought, this is the one. And then it moved over to Misty Copeland, the first ballerina of color. And then I grew into a teenager and I realized this whole role model thing, it was a sham. That cricketer my friend loved, retired. This movie star, washed up. That Tour de France winner, let's not even go there. Hinging my life on a person, I decided, in the spirit of teenagers everywhere, was so passe. I was going to be my own guy. And role models, all they seemed to do was disappoint. But life has a way of coming back to you. And perhaps all I needed to do as a child was trust that my role model would show up for me when I was ready for her, where I least expected it. In 2016 on Facebook. Let it never be said that Facebook was good for absolutely nothing. I followed a lot of feminist writing on Facebook and I discovered a really short biography as I was scrolling through a page of a person who, unbeknownst to me, was going to change my life, like going to become an obsession. I fall in love hard and fast. And I saw that picture of Noor Inayat Khan and I felt that tingling, that feeling that your life is never going to be the same again, that the person who you're looking at will feature prominently in all your stories, leaving her fingerprints on your soul, molding you from the lump of clay you used to be. तू पी ले अमी रस धारा गगन में झड़ी लगी तू पी ले अमी रस धारा गगन में झड़ी लगी हाँ झड़ी लगी पी ले अमी रस धारा गगन में झड़ी लगी. On the banks of the Moskva River in Moscow, on the 1st of January 1914, in the biting Russian cold, a little girl was born. Her parents, Hazrat Inayat Khan and Aura Ray Baker, named her Noor Nisa, the light of womanhood. And perhaps you're already wondering about her parents. Hazrat Inayat Khan was a Sufi musician and a philosopher, a descendant of Tipu Sultan. And he toured the world giving Sufi concerts and performances. And in New York, when he was performing once, Aura Ray Baker was in the audience. It was love at first sight. They threw caution to the wind and decided to start a family together. They traveled around Europe till they finally came to France, to the Surens, to a house called Fazal Manzil. Hidayat and Vilayat, their two younger sons, adored their older sister, Noor. Everyone agreed that she was a darling. Each one of the philosophers, the poets, the musicians who walked through the doors of Fazal Manzil would notice Noor in the garden, talking to some fairies, writing a poem about a flower. They all remarked on the quiet self-sufficiency of this child. When she was 4, she found out that children in Russia were starving because of the cold. And for almost 2 years after that, she put away every box of chocolates that she received from anybody. She kept asking for more. She put them all away in a giant bag, which her parents found 2 years later with a little label that said, "For the children in Russia." Noor grew up pretty much the same way we all do, falling in love, falling out of it. She was engaged to a man her father chose. She decided to end that relationship. She met a quiet, thoughtful Jewish pianist, and they held hands in a rose garden. Then the first tragedy struck, the death of her father. Noor began to look after her grief-stricken mother and her siblings. She was quieter and dreamier than ever before, studying child psychology at the Sorbonne and playing the harp. It was then that a family friend spoke to her, Baroness von Thuil. The Baroness was an illustrator of children's books, and she suggested to Noor that she work on an English translation of the Jataka Tales. What emerged were a set of stories that went on to define Noor's life. Simple stories told from Buddhism, made even more beautiful with Noor's straightforward and lovely translation. She discovered a real knack for writing for children. She became a regular contributor to the Sunday Figaro. Her stories were read out on the radio. And I think about this as I do voiceovers for children's books. I think about how at this juncture, Noor was probably fairly certain what her life would look like. Write books for children, get married someday, look after her family, sing, play the harp, the sweet and idyllic life that perhaps we can all agree she deserves. But every storyteller and every story listener knows that if we always got what we wanted, maybe we'd never be the people we need to be, or the person that a 20-something needed so many decades later. But before that, I would like to tell you a story from Noor's book, a retelling of the Jataka Tales. बूंद का प्यासा घड़ा भर पाया, सपने में वो स्वाद न आया। बूंद का प्यासा घड़ा भर पाया, सपने में वो स्वाद न आया। कहो किसे कैसे समझाए, कहो किसे कैसे समझाए, एक बूंद की तारण लगी पीले, अमीरस धारा गगन में झड़ी लगी। The Buddha sat in front of a group of children and said to them, "My children, today you see me as the Buddha, but I have had many lives before, and in lives before this, perhaps I've been a monkey or a deer or a wolf howling at the moon. And the story I will tell you today is from one of these lives, the story of the monkey bridge." A giant-like monkey once ruled over 80,000 monkeys in the Himalayas. And through the rocks where they lived streamed the river Ganges before reaching the valley where the cities were built. And there, where the bubbling water flew rock to rock, stood a magnificent tree. In spring, it bore tender white blossoms, and later it was laden with fruit so wonderful that none could be compared to them. And the sweet winds of the mountain gave them the sweetness of honey. How happy the monkeys were. They ate of the fruit and lived in the shade of the wonderful tree. And from one side of the tree, the branches spread over the water. Therefore, when the first blossom appeared, the monkeys ate or destroyed the flowers on those branches, that the fruit might not grow on them. And if a fruit were to grow, they plucked it were it no larger than the heart of a blossom. For the chief, seeing the danger, had warned them, saying, "Beware, let not a fruit fall into the water, lest the river carry it to the city, where men, seeing the beautiful fruit, might search for the tree, and following the river up into the hills may find this tree. They would take all the fruit, and we would have to flee from here." And thus the monkeys obeyed. And for a long time, never a fruit fell into the river. But the day came when one ripe fruit was hidden by the ant's nest. Unseen by the leaves, it fell into the water and was taken by the flow of the river down, down, down the rocky hills to the valley where the large city of Benares, where the fruit passed by, the large city of Benares, pushed between two nets where some fishermen held. The king of Benares, King Brahmadatta, was bathing in the water, playing with the little rays of light that were falling into the nets, and then the fruit floated past him. "Wonderful," one of the fishermen exclaimed. "Where on earth grows such a fruit as this?" And seizing it with sparkling eyes, he gave it to the king. Brahmadatta gazed at the fruit and marveled at its beauty. "Where is the tree that bears such a fruit to be found?" And seizing it, he called some woodcutters and opened the fruit up. The woodcutters said, "Sire, it is a mango. A wonderful mango. Such a fruit as this grows not in our valleys. It grows only in the hills, where the air is pure and the sun rays undisturbed. No doubt the tree stands on the waterside, and the fruit, having fallen in the water, has been carried here." The king asked the men to taste of it. And when they had done so, he also tasted of it and gave of it to his ministers and attendants. "Indeed," he said, "such a fruit is divine. Never can another be compared to this." The days and nights went slowly by. Brahmadatta grew more and more restless. The longing to taste of the fruit once again became stronger as each day passed. In the night, he saw in his dreams that enchanted tree carrying on each branch 100 golden cups of honey and nectar. Indeed, it must be found, said the king one day, and he gave orders that a boat be prepared to sail up the river Ganges, up the Himalayan rocks, where perhaps the tree might be found. And Brahmadatta himself went with the men. Long indeed was the journey, passing through fields of rice and flowers. But at last, the king and his followers reached the Himalayan hills one evening, and gazing in the distance, what did they see? There, beneath the moonlight, stood the longed for tree, its golden fruit glittering through the leaves. But what was that moving on each branch? What strange little shadows were sliding through the leaves? See, said one of the men, it is a troop of monkeys. Monkeys? Said the king, eating the fruit? Surround the trees so that they may not escape. At dawn we will shoot them and eat of their meat and the mangoes. The words came to the ears of the monkeys, and trembling they said to their leaders, Alas, you had warned us, beloved chief. But some fruit may have fallen in the stream, for the men have come here and they surround our tree and we cannot escape. For we heard words coming from the mouth of one of them saying, At dawn we will shoot them, eat of their meat and the mangoes. I will save you, my little ones, said the chief. Fear not, but do as I say. Thus consoling them, the mighty chief climbed to the highest branch of the tree, and as swift as the wind passing through the rocks, he jumped 100 boughs length through space and landed on the tree on the opposite bank of the river. There at the edge of the water were the long reeds. He pulled out one of these long reeds and tied it to his ankle. He thought to himself, I will bind one end of this reed to this tree and the other to my foot, and then I will spring again to the mango tree. Thus a bridge will be made over which my subjects can flee. 100 boughs lengths I have jumped. The reed is so much longer than 100 boughs length. And saying so, his heart was filled with joy and he sprang back to the tree, but alas, the reed was too short. The monkey king was only just able to reach the other branch. With a mighty effort, he clung to the branch and called out to all of his thousands of followers and said, Run over my back. Run over my back to the reed and you will be saved. One by one, the monkeys ran over him to the reed. But one among them, called Devadatta, jumped heavily on his back. Alas, piercing pain seized him. The heartless little monkey went on his way, leaving his chief to suffer alone. Brahmadatta, on the ground, had seen all of this that was happening, and tears streamed from his eyes as he gazed upon the stricken monkey chief. He ordered that he be brought down to the tree to which he still clung, that sweet water be given to him to drink, that he be bathed and clothed in yellow robes. And when the chief was bathed and clad, he lay beneath the tree, and the king sat at his side and spoke to him and said, You've made of your body a bridge for others to cross. Did you not know that your own life would come to an end doing so? You've given your life to save your followers. Who are you, blessed chief? And who are they? O king, replied the monkey, I am their chief and their guide. They lived with me in this tree, and I was their father, and I loved them. I do not suffer in leaving this world, for if I have gained my subjects' freedom, that is all I ask. And if in my death may be a lesson to you, then I am more than happy. It is not your sword which makes you a king. It is love alone. Forget not that your life is but little to give, if in giving you secure the happiness of your people. Rule them not through power because they are your subjects. Nay, rule them through love because they are your children. In this way only you shall be king. When I am no longer here, forget not my words, O Brahmadatta. The Blessed One then closed his eyes and died. प्यास बिना क्या पीवे रे पानी, प्यासे के लिए है वो पानी. प्यास बिना क्या पीवे रे पानी, प्यास के लिए है वो पानी, बिन अधिकार कोई नहीं जानी, बिन अधिकार कोई नहीं जानी, अमृत रस की झड़ी लगी, पीले अमी रस धारा गगन में झड़ी लगी. When Noor was 25 years old, World War II began. Families were leaving France en masse. There was no work at all for a children's book writer. Every day, the danger of the Nazis appeared closer and closer at hand until one day, she and her brother Vilayat knew they needed to do something. But what? They were all raised as Sufis. And a fundamental tenet of Sufism is pacifism and nonviolence. But they could see firsthand the cost of the war. They sat up one tense afternoon, pacing the floor and talking about it. How could they speak? How could they preach spiritual morality without participating in preventive action? Can we just stand by and watch them do what they are doing? Noor broke off her engagement and left with Vinayat to the United Kingdom to sign up for the war effort. Getting to the UK was becoming more and more difficult every single day. And when they finally reached Oxford, Vilayat fell gravely ill, and it was up to Noor alone to figure it out, to go fight for what she believed in. Noor began to volunteer with the Women's Auxiliary Air Force. She started learning how to use the wireless machine. She climbed her way up to aircraft woman second class, and then the summons came. The British Special Operations Team was looking for wireless operators to go undercover in France. There were 3 requirements. Had to be a woman, she had to speak French as fluently as the French did, and third, she would have to know how to operate a wireless machine. Noor fit all 3. Being an operator was one of the hardest jobs in the field. It required sending and receiving encoded messages and aiding the resistance that was operating in France. The life expectancy of an operator in 1943 was 6 weeks. Every other woman spy who was sent into France before Noor was only a courier, only carrying information in and coming back. Noor was to be the first woman operator. Reading Noor's reports from this time is an exercise in seeing myself reflected squarely in somebody else. Can run well, but is otherwise clumsy. Unsuitable for jumping. Read Noor's physical examination. Sounded like it could have come straight out of my 6th standard marks card. Other comments from her instructors said things like, very feminine in character, eager to please, very ready to adapt herself to the mood of the company, one of the conversation, imaginative, unwilling to be two-faced, which could be a serious disadvantage in a war. And then, of course, there was the problem of the codes. Noor would leave her code books lying around with critical information for anyone to access. She'd give her codes to anybody who asked because she could not tell a lie. Sufism prohibited it. Leo Marx was master codemaker, head of communications at SOE. He sat her down after one particularly frustrating class and said, do you know it would take someone 10,000 attempts to crack this code that you just sent? Noor was close to tears. Leo Marx had seen the other trainees gossip about the girl with the eyes too big for her face. He had riffled through the children's books that she had written, and it broke his heart. But he knew this was the only way. Noor, he said, every time you encode a message, think of the letters as monkeys trying to cross the bridge from Paris to London. If they fall off, they'll get caught and shot, but they can't cross themselves. You have to help them. And if you don't help them by guiding them slowly and methodically, one step at a time, giving them all your thoughts and all your protections, they'll never reach the other side. When there's a truth to pass on, don't let your code tell lies. Noor's errors dropped by half. Noor left for France with 2 weeks still left of her training. She was dropped in on a Lysander aircraft and was witness to an entire ring of British espionage operations collapse. She was the last spy still left in France in 1943 after two French double agents had managed to hand over every other operative to the Germans. Some sources say that the prize money on Noor's head was £100,000 that summer. She was captured in October and she had been holding fort since June. The Gestapo took her to a secret location and continued to send messages back to special operations under Noor's name. The British were taken in by these messages and they had no idea that Noor was captured. They didn't even know they had to send help. After two failed attempts at escape, Noor was taken to Sorheim and kept in solitary confinement for 10 months, shackled hand and foot. I wrote a play about Noor's life, and I spent a lot of time thinking about this, about what Noor would have been thinking about in all that time. We have no records, of course. The only thing we have is a solitary cup of food in which she had scratched her name, Nora Baker, and her mother's London address. And this is the last time we see Noor's own writing. Noor was taken to Dachau in September 1944. She was shot in the head, and the last word she shouted was liberty, liberty in French. In the entire time she was captured by the Germans, she revealed no code, no locations, and no other information about British intelligence in France. She allowed every last monkey to cross. Ami ras pive, amar pad pave, bhavyoni me kabhau nahi aave. Ami ras pive, amar pad pave, bhavyoni me kabhau nahi aave. जन्म मरण का दुख न सावे, जन्म मरण का दुख न सावे, खटकी गगरिया भरण लगी, पीले अमीर तारा गगन में झड़ी लगी, तू पीले अमीर से धारा गगन में झड़ी लगी. Noor represents resistance in the face of adversity. To love, but to let not that love become inaction, to give and hesitate not in the giving. While being interviewed to join the special operations team, the British asked Noor about her work. Badri, I have 5 more minutes. You want me to keep going? 10? Okay.
You have 500 minutes.
I have 500 minutes. Okay.
Because these things are happening. And I mean, take all the time that you would like to.
10 minutes.
500.
Okay.
Go for it.
While being interviewed to join the British Special Operations Team, Noor was asked, obviously, about the India question. The British were wary of Noor, whose father was close friends with the likes of Sarojini Naidu and Rabindranath Tagore. Noor was clear. She believed that India should fight in World War II so that the British would know exactly what they were up against when they came back to fight them later. She assured her interviewers that once she was done with the war, she would go home and fight with the nationalist movement. Noor gave everything of herself. She became a pacifist that fought dirty, a klutz who climbed buildings, a Sufi who lied daily, an artist who braved torture, a captive who told nothing. And for me, she became a role model, slowly but surely instilling in me the belief that maybe there is no being, there's only becoming. That we're so keen to write out the rest of our lives with such certainty when we don't remember that we're just boats being tossed around in this ocean of uncertainty. She became the person that she needed to be, and in doing so gave me the permission to be the person I needed to be. बूंद में रस गुरु जी की वाणी, जीवन रसता है यह पानी। बूंद में रस गुरु जी की वाणी, जीवन रसता है यह पानी। कबीर संगत में हो हमारी, कबीर संगत में हो हमारी, डाली प्रेम की हरी भरी, पीले अमीरस धारा गगन में झड़ी लगी। तू पीले अमीरस धारा गगन में झड़ी लगी। हाँ झड़ी लगी, हाँ झड़ी लगी, पीले अमीरस धारा गगन में झड़ी लगी। ओहो बरसे अमीरस धारा गगन में झड़ी लगी। तू पीले अमीरस धारा गगन में झड़ी लगी। It is a strange and isolating time for all of us. I find myself looking back to the past, not just my own past, through throwback photos, through digging out childhood memories, but also to my foremothers, the people who have gone before me, who've given me the courage to speak my stories the way I want to. I'm all done now, Badri. So I just wanted to say a couple of thank yous, may I? So for everybody who liked this, please go read Spy Princess by Shravani Basu. It is a very comprehensive autobiography of the life of, a biography of the life of Noor Inayat Khan. 2, the song is called Tu Pile Amiras Thara. It's a Kabir song. And it was taught to me by Vipul Rikhi. Please look at his work. He's fantastic. He has a website called Ishq Fakiri if you want to listen to more Kabir. I performed this first with By the River, which is an organization with which I tell stories. So please follow us on stories at By the River. And thank you, Badri, for having me.
No, I mean, it's our deep pleasure to have you. And how earnest your eyes are, Kavya. Like listening to this, it felt like deeply spiritual because I was connecting to what she stood for and who she is and why she's in our lives. And I mean, so thanks for sharing it with a fullness of feeling.
Thank you.
You don't like the work of imagination when you encounter a story is often yours, right? As a consumer of the story, but you made it possible for it to be consumed rather easily. It went out very comfortably.
I have something about this that I leave out sometimes, but I also say sometimes. And since you said it, I'm going to say it. Something that really appeals to me about Kabir and about the Sufi movement and the Bhakti movement and all of that is this idea of a personal relationship with the divine. And I see my art as my personal relationship with the divine. Like it is a spiritual experience for me in some ways. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you could go on that theme for a long while. I also wanted to say your artistic manifestations aside, your academic antecedents are showing in the fact that your performance comes with citations. You could have waited till we asked you at least, Kavya. You know, nobody's asking you to say these things. Now, what am I supposed to ask you? Like, we have 50. There are thousands of things I could ask you. If anyone who's been on the show know that we talk about nothing for hours. Yeah, something for minutes. Nothing for hours. That should be the alternative name to the show. You know, this Kavya, so that was really beautiful. Thank you for doing this with us. Thank you for doing this for us. Yeah, I feel like super lucky to be able to encounter this with you, you know, and encounter you. I wanted to ask you like a slightly, a question which I think it's impossible to ignore. Like you said, rule the world with love, and Noor said that, and uh, here we are talking about giving fearlessly. And how do you think about the pain and suffering and the cruelties and the deliberate cruelties, and often like the scarring of our souls and minds, which comes with and from loving? It's not easy, and it takes years and years. It's the hardest and the easiest thing to be able to love, I think. um, it's the hardest because to remember to love is often the hardest. The doing of it is super easy, and the more you do of it, the more you want to do of it. So it
Yeah.
doesn't feel like there's a reason not to do it once you start doing it. So it's like, so it is a slippery slope I want to be on, so to say. But how do you think about pain? How do you think about cruelty? What do you know, like the story of Noor is beautiful in that we smile wistfully. I wish we could sing her praises of glory as an old lady who retired, you know, and not feel not celebrate her death in this through her martyrdom. But
Yeah.
what I loved about your piece was it was very much about her existence, not about her passing. There was the interlude before and after shooting her, and I noticed that that would have been a logical break for a piece somewhere else. So obviously, you chose to expand it out for us, which was very nice of you. But how do you think Noor would have felt about the hardness of loving, not the softness of loving?
Mm. Um, I think okay, so when you were talking about the hardness of loving, the first thing that I think about is from my own life, which is that I have my background is in the disability sector. So before I became a theater artist, I used to work full time with people with disabilities, and something that I had a moment with my mentor from the disability sector. Her name is Shanti, which is lovely. I had just come off finishing my master's thesis, and my master's thesis was working with children with multiple disabilities. So this is like 3, 4, 5 year olds with vision impairment, hearing impairment, physical disability, cerebral palsy in combination. It was the hardest work of my life, going in there every single day, observing these children in their classrooms and leaving, to the point where in the middle of my field work, I had to call my professorial guides and I had to say, I can't do this. I can't go into that school. I can't see this pain and come back. I can't anymore. And then I joined a disability sector organization here in Bangalore. And I was talking to Shanti, the founder of that NGO, about this. And I said, you know, like, what is it that's keeping you going? You've been running this organization for 20 years. And she said something that I will remember for the rest of my life. She said, I think the key is action. You have to convert your emotions to action. What was so hard for me when I was doing my MAP work was that it was observation. I didn't feel like a participant. And then I think the hardest part of loving is when you can't participate, like when you have to watch somebody you love in pain. Like, I think that's harder. um,
Mm.
and then when there's a way to convert the feeling to action, I think it becomes easier.
Oh man, what a great answer. Wow. Like the idea that love by itself has no meaning, but loving does, is so liberating to think that an adjective can turn into an adverb, and verbs and aspects of everyday life is, oh, it's so, like, I feel like you've unlocked a new possibility of my being. And so and I'm very happy, very grateful for that. I want to ask you another question, Kavya, which is, I mean, it's funny. I've met you only once before. This is the first time you're doing this, but I have no doubt we're going to do many more of these sessions. I want to ask you about your work with disability. I'm wondering whether we should do it now or we should do it after the next session we do with you, where you teach us nursery rhymes in sign language. We haven't discussed this, but this is the way we gently suggest
You
that
trap artists. You bring them on and then you give them a yeah.
we put you on a live stream and say, you have streamed now live. Uh, you know, so this is we have to do something in that direction. So I'm going to hold off on this question of disability just now. Can I ask you, what have you learned through Noor that you didn't already feel before? Because it felt like you went looking for Noor and you found Noor. She happened out of the blue, you know, and I have so much faith in serendipity as an idea. I'm a huge fan of randomness and serendipity, right? The idea that you can have the optionality to choose which wave you want to coast is deeply liberating. So I want to ask you, what did you learn through Noor that you didn't already feel before? Because clearly your intuitions were confirmed. The love for life was confirmed. She was a woman, and she was a heroic woman. And so it's obviously not those two things. It can't be. What else can't it be? It can't be leading double lives and having enjoying the richness of life, which we'll come to, because you've always enjoyed the richness of life. For as long as I've known you, you've been this like multidimensional being, and you've thrived in your multidimensionality, right? And I mean this like, this is just like my observation or whatever. And we've spoken about this before, like even if not explicitly so. So tell us, what did you learn from Noor that you didn't already know?
um More than anything else, I had this suspicion, which I still harbor sometimes, that the world is bad to softies. And I have been a softie all my life. Like I cry all the time. Like it's not funny. And I always thought that if you were soft, you couldn't also be strong.
Mm.
And that for me is the one thing Noor gives me hope for. Like the thing that I can anchor my feelings towards, the reason it feels like she's like me, like my sister, or like my, like, I don't know, previous Janmam kind of, I don't know what.
No, dude. Yeah, Kavya, I'm very annoyed at you because it feels like you prepared answers to all of these like questions which we would have otherwise like revealed parts of your soul. I mean, it's okay. Everyone knows these things about your soul, so I suppose you have to enjoy it anyway. But this idea that, man, I cry all the time as well. I cry with pain and joy every day, and like maybe a few times, if not more. At the least,
Yeah.
it's a few times. But I like again, that's a deeply liberating feeling that like softness and strongness go together. I actually learned this while learning color Ipaitu a couple of years ago from Ram Kumar, who's an amazing teacher, and we'll have him here sometime with the other. And I was not like I'm a somatically or physically activated human being, but he was the one who taught me how to be that way. Him and Kusai uh, taught me how to be that way. And you know, during these coloring exercises, we would do many different things. One of which was to hold another person's arm and like get them to pull away, right? If you're hard, you'd notice that it's actually, see, the goal is really only to stay stuck with the other person. So you don't have to be obsessed with the idea that you have to exert your force in a certain way to hold on to this person, right? And that was the first time I encountered the idea of softness and hardness. And you're so right in saying that there's a parallel of your life in soft and hardness with Noor, because I feel feel that way as well. And I think the best manifestation of this was her intuition towards the Jataka Tales and why it was around and what it was about.
That's
So
her original text, of course. The piece that I performed is her words, which also is like was really important to me. That I get to value her writing and honor it.
but is it just that? But even to hear her in her own words. So it was not a story about her as much as Noor sharing parts of herself with through you, you know, and that you were able to make space for her to emerge here today is pretty beautiful. And thank you for like giving meaning to our aspiration, which was to say that we want to have love for beauty and love for wisdom, right? And this was both, you know. I see that our other panelists are here beautifully time. So we have Isha and Siddharth and Sahana. We also have Kritika and Padmini from our team who are waiting in the wings, noting each one of these details of our work and other things down. So so we have good notes and we can come back to the ideas that we discover. May I request you all to, Isha, Sahana, Siddharth, to turn on your video, unmute yourself, appear, manifest before us. Hey, this is perfect. You should always start with the camera angle slightly off. Just as Sahana revealed. Uh, this is hi, 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 Sahana. Hi. Siddharth, I'm going to ask to unmute
Yeah.
you. Hopefully, you'll be with us.
Video.
Hey, hi, hi. We would love to see you as well.
Yeah, can you see me?
Yes, loud and clear. More loud than clear, but that's good enough for now. So, Kavya, first of all, thank you so much for doing this. As I told you earlier, I would love for you to stay on and participate in the conversation because it's impossible to talk about love without talking about freedom. It's impossible to talk about freedom without talking about the lack of it, unfreedom, right? And today's conversation is about imprisonment and what being imprisoned could mean. And if we explore it metaphorically through Kavya's piece, we are going to understand the violence of the state and the exercise of the authority of the state, right? Yeah, so I look forward to wherever our conversation takes us. And to the four of you now, I want to ask, so before, for any of our new joinees, so to say, not the three of you, but others on the video. This is the 9th episode of Lawyers, Artists, and Others Talk Law, Love, and Equity. This is broadcast media which is inspired by love for beauty and love for wisdom, which is meant to be the polar opposite of everything that we know of in the context of our news media. We are also not news at all. We are very old. We try to have conversations which would have been relevant 100 years ago or 100 years in the future, right? And these are matters of eternal import, like philosophical questions that have been relevant as long as we've been alive, right? And we're not interested in the deadness of philosophy. And Kavya spoke about being and becoming, and I couldn't help thinking about like Heidegger, and I was like, oh, okay, but that's really not the point here. The point is the journey of becoming and the living of life. And Kavya was just talking about the act of love as being a living thing and loving as an ideal. That's very much our aspiration with the media that we want to put out in the society, right? And we also think India doesn't have a public news channel. Doordarshan is at best a government channel. So we want to be a private enterprise with public aspirations. I want that to be true of all our projects and as true with Just Learning and this series as well, right? So the cost of running this is actually very, very low. All we had to put together was a Zoom Pro account and really nothing else. And you're all here because we share about the same kind of values and ideals, which is awesome. So this series is meant to be a series of fundraisers. Each month we want to do different kinds of fundraisers. The first month is about 3 fundamental causes. The first one is social security for migrant workers. The second one is food security for the urban poor. And the third one is essential care equipment for caregivers, like the strangers in our lives who make our lives possible. This event is a partnership between a few organizations. I mean, it's come out of a few organizations. The first is Just Learning, which is this initiative which is trying to make love and justice inevitable in the world and to design systems that would make that possible. It involves Gather, which is interested in designing better human interactions and building communities. It involves Help a Stranger, which is an initiative we've just launched where we're enabling direct cash transfers to the strangers in your life, right? So you can nominate the strangers in your life. It could be cab drivers, domestic workers, sex workers, whoever you think around you who deserves and who is facing the hardship of our existence, right? Like capitalism is dead, long live capitalism. Consumerism is dead, long live consumerism. The consumerism we want to have is the consumption of beauty. The capitalism we want to have is the love capital, right? Not the kind that we've seen so far. Those systems are broken, and that's who we are and how we want to be. So that's what this series is about. And Kavya just performed this really beautiful, like I was about to say set, yeah, but like not everything is music.
That is fine.
set is something. So yeah, Kavya performed this really beautiful set of Noor and I, where she featured Noor Inayat Khan, who was a British spy during the World War. It was a really moving and beautiful tale. If you haven't had the chance to check it out yet, we would say just go back 1 hour in time. You can in these times, and you must this time. And so, like in the next section, so we have Kavya, who is a disabilities researcher, artist, dramaturg, and like 1,000 other things, all of which we will eventually discover. The other three of you are also like have extremely rich lives. We have Sahana, who's Sahana and Isha, both advocates in Bombay. Sahana was with the project 39A, which works with death row inmates and worked with the CHRI on reports on prisons in Karnataka, and did a lot of field work in that direction. We have Isha, who for me is easily one of the most inspiring like contemporaries that I know of, because she turned her love for justice into clinical education out in areas where you usually never come see it. So she's one of the co-founders of the path-breaking Jagdalpur Legal Aid Group. We have Siddharth Sangameshwaran, who I've had the pleasure of speaking to maybe 2 or 3 days ago. And this is the first real conversation that I'm having with him. He's doing some super inspiring work, so he works with an organization called Prisons Forum Karnataka. They taught a course on prison rights in different universities. He has been working much like Isha on efforts on working with prisoners during COVID, right? Like what kind of principles and policies can you set in place so that prisons don't turn into hotspots, should be like deeply feral and violent, right? So I mean, it's very inspiring to have all of you here. It's a deep pleasure. Sana, could you please like push like your screen a little below, because we see 2/3 of your head. Yeah, this is great. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, but it's a little faint. So I mean, we can just figure that out. Okay, so the question that I want to start with for all of you is to ask you to describe yourself without talking about what you do or where you're from. I've already said all of these things. So please introduce yourself for us so we can enjoy with you the richness of your life. You know, all of you are so much more than the work that you do. And this is something we miss seeing in the humans that we encounter. We encounter humans through the roles they play in our lives. So very like utilitarian kind of existence, and that's lame as hell. So you can talk about your dreams, your aspirations, your fears, your loves, and like your favorite food, animals. I mean, basically anything. Just don't talk about what you do or where you're from. Yeah, we hear enough and more about that, and we have the next 1.5 hours for that. So besides that, anything else would be great. So Kavya, you first.
Me first. Okay.
Hey, you're the artist. You're the one with like ready answers to like deep philosophical questions you've already encountered in
Only about the work that I know them. Okay.
In my previous janmas. No, you said punarjanma. I don't know what you said, but like clearly you have this like across life situation. You have to begin. Sorry.
To begin. Oh God. Okay, I'll try my best. I am a daydreamer. I think I spend a lot of my time with my head in the clouds. I love to sing. I'm always humming, and I've always got something to dance about. I care very deeply. I feel way too much. And I love talking to people about my feelings. And that's why I get on stage. That's me.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful answer. I was just thinking you're a daydreamer and a night schemer, you know, like
Oh, yes.
you can use this in your LinkedIn profile if you have to. You know?
Done. I really don't, but yes, I will.
You could. That's where all possibilities begin, Kavya. So thanks for the beautiful answer. Siddharth, I'm going to have to ask you this question. Yeah, I've already, said it, but tell us about yourself. Just don't tell us what you do or where you're from.
Bobby, thank you for asking this question. Usually everyone wants to know, jump into what you do and what you don't do. But, you know, you're asking us to not talk about that, which is great. I really like I really like history. I think I'm a bit of a history buff, if I could say so myself. I really enjoy traveling and reading. It's a bit cliche to say, but I like it. I mean, that's something that I really enjoy. But something that's really like been, during this entire lockdown, something I've been thinking about a lot is about our natural heritage. And it just got me, thinking about this because I was reading this book, this fantastic book about the discovery of Bangalore, which talks about the history of Bangalore and all the heritage that this city has, and how we, as a population, how we should work towards preserving it and looking after it, because we're losing it on a day-to-day basis. And I think, going forward in the future, this is something that would make a lot of people happy by having such, rich and diverse heritage that we have in this beautiful city. So I love Bangalore. I could see, call me a Bangalore fan if you want.
Yeah. Hey, Siddharth, may I just say on behalf of all buffs that buffs identify themselves. So you may always say so. You don't need to seek confirmation of your buffness. It's wonderful to hear about your desire to encounter history anew. And your fascination with Bangalore, it really, I mean, I like the idea that it has a local focus. It's nice to be historical about yourself, your ancestors and your world and the trees and plants and all these other things. So that was a lovely answer. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. Isha, it's your turn now to not talk about work for a few minutes.
I really did not think this question would come up. I would rather...
It's not an examination. This is life.
It almost feels like it.
Did you learn this with your work?
Adri, you're out of syllabus. What to do?
Oh my God. Is that me, or does that sound inappropriate on a forum such as this? This is, given how much anxiety testing causes in our country, please, we shouldn't make jokes of being in or out of syllabus. It's in the interest, with my great moderation powers, this is the rules of the game. There is no syllabus to life, and we all know this already. This is adulthood as well. But yeah, sorry, Isha, for being out of syllabus.
I was really hoping you would ask Sahana this question first. But,
no. And we're going to toss to Sahana the most.
This didn't go as I thought. So I don't know. This is a very difficult question. My last many years work has been life. I really don't see it as a separation. But yes, that's not all that is. And I cannot think of how to describe myself. It's bizarre. I'm somebody at this moment who is really trying to figure how to run away from cities, which I cannot stand. So I'm trying to run away from Bombay, and that's all my current phase of mind is, that I want to run away to somewhere after living in Chhattisgarh and Bastar. I think that's where I aspire to be eventually. The calm and peace is all I'm aspiring at this point. But yeah, at a very personal level. That's all.
Exactly. That's all. Calm and peace. That's all. This is not all at all. It is very, very hard. But like what Kavya said earlier could help us all, that love has meaning in loving. So peace has meaning in piecing. So we should piece together our lives peacefully. And thank you for that lovely answer and sharing that bit of yourself. I also feel like everyone in Bombay is running from Bombay, or to pass Bombay.
They should.
Bombay, like, no, I don't. I love the city. Like, it's maximum city doesn't describe its maximum good, if you ask me. But here's another city angle. Sahana, another Mumbaikar, who I hope is not unhappy about being a Mumbaikar, because she's always a Mysore girl first. So I have already said where you're from and what you do. So please talk about anything else.
First of all, I just want to say Isha is a traitor, because we both agreed that this question would not have an answer from us. But I really honestly don't know how to explain myself really beyond work, I'd say. Am I a Mumbaikar right now? Just, I guess, figuring it out still. Bombay is still very new to me. And yeah, I think I'd rather answer the questions that are about work, because I really do not know how else to, introduce myself.
Hey, then let me make it easier for you, Sahana. What's the last thing that you found beautiful? And you can't talk about the last 1 hour, 15 minutes, because everyone knows that.
That's not fair. I was just going to say I loved Kavya's piece. It was wonderful. I really enjoyed the story and the story within the story and the songs in the story. It was beautiful, and I loved how you spoke about uncertainty, which really in these times is something we're all grappling with in whatever way, personal life, professional life, but mostly obviously with the virus. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know. Should I still answer? What is the most beautiful thing I found recently?
Yeah, by all means, keep answering.
Hmm.
Full of questions. Like,
I don't know. The coffee I had this morning
oh,
was
yeah.
nice. Yeah, it was very nice.
Oh, I love a good coffee.
Hmm.
The very dear friend gifted me some amazing Black Bazaar coffee, which you should check out if you haven't.
Okay.
It's harvested by the Solega tribals of BR Hills. So it's straight from the forest, and it tastes like this honey in your mouth. And they have great names. The ones I have at home are Otto and Luna, appropriate for aeropresses and French presses. Like this forestry ground. Not going to nerd out about this anymore. Some coffees are equal, some coffees are more equal than others. For me, instant coffee is banned. But anyway, so we are also against instant noodles for the most part. So, this conversation is the opposite of the instant. Uh, we want to be as expensive as we can. And I have a question for all of you. I'd like to begin with, which is, what is one thing that you like? I'd like you to describe in one sentence what you do. Yeah, like if you have described one fundamental focus of one, not more than one sentence, and you're not allowed to have Heidegger length German sentences. Kavya, looking at you. So what is one thing you've learned over the course of your work that you think everyone in the world should know? Yeah. The second part of the answer, please feel free to answer as expansively as you want to. I'm sure we'll have a lot of ideas that are going to float around the room, world, interwebs, to make this more meaningful. So Kavya, we'll start with you.
What is one thing I've learned in the course of my work that I think everybody should know or
Yes.
should know?
Should know. Yeah.
Mm. Um, uh, if you love something, it will show. Like if you care about the work and if you're really passionate about it, if you love the work, it'll show. And then the corollary, obviously, is that if you don't like it, it'll show. My mom has this story about some darshini in South Bangalore where the dosa guy changed after 10 years and everybody was like, what's up? And he was having a bad day or whatever. And the point of that story is that if you were making the dosa and you were happy, everybody would tell or would be able to tell. I think it's something that's been very true of my work. I've followed my passions. I've had a very unconventional career so far. Yeah, I try my best to do the things I love. And I know that's a function of my privilege. Like I'm fully aware of that. But yeah, I think the love you feel for your work will show is the one thing.
Beautiful. What a great answer. Because that's so true of everyone who's here on this panel. I mean, I really admire all of you here. And Siddharth, I know you only for a couple of days, but like it shows the love that Kavya is describing is here. I've met Isha for precisely 45 minutes so far, but encountered her work earlier. I've known Sahana now for over a decade, and it's like a deep privilege. And it's obvious in everything, in all the work that you do, that it shows. I also like that this answer holds true for your personal life. So there's nothing to distinguish like other forms of loving necessarily, right? We can feel it, you can show it. So I guess like pretending is the best way to like snap yourself out of love and into love. So it's both an aspiration and a journey simultaneously. So thanks for that wonderful answer. Yeah, and sorry for my unsolicited musings and opinions. I'm going to try to be a little more measured than I have been. Siddharth, describe in one sentence what you do and tell us what you've learned, which you think everyone should know.
I think in working in this field, it's just incredibly important to have empathy. I think not just in any field across, in whatever you do, it's important to be empathetical and to develop a fair amount of, emotional intelligence along with whatever intelligent quotient that you have. It's just that I really believe that in whatever work that you do, it's important to have empathy. And it's really key at this point. And it's really crucial, especially the way we're going in terms of the world at this point of time.
Okay, that's a very fair response. The idea is that your answer should be sufficiently distinctive. Kavya had latitude because she's an artist. But in any case, the point I want to make to you, Siddharth, is feel free to include a factual piece of information. For instance, I've only known prisons from like police stations, and I have hesitated to walk in that direction because it feels animalistic, right? You can hear loud yelps, and like it's scary. You get scared of the thing that you cage, right? Like so sometimes the fear comes after the caging, not and you don't have the capacity to empathize what's behind it. So I see the value of the first point that you're making, but feel free to pick like love for you to pick like a factual circumstance that would, I mean, yeah, there's a factual thing that everyone should know. Things like, you can stay in prison forever if the state wants you to, as we're seeing right now, in unforgivable circumstances. And the pregnancy of a woman is completely independent of the fact that the state is perhaps, undoubtedly overusing its powers to oppress a particular way of being, right? And I'm entitled to this opinion constitutionally, and I wish we can continue to enjoy that privilege. So, not that privilege, it's a right. I don't want to anger myself over this, but Siddharth, so my question to you is, is to talk about perhaps a fact or a circumstance or anything else.
If you were to bring a factual instance in this, is that there are many people in this country all over. I mean, there are cases that come up to light. There was a case in Rajasthan, but last year, of people who have spent close to 21 to 22 years in prison and then acquitted at the end of the process, right? The innocent people, there is a maxim in law that everybody knows that you're innocent till proven guilty, right? So there are many people, whether innocent or guilty, who are, spending time in prisons and in other closed institutions across this country, in really squalid conditions, in conditions that should not, if you're going to uphold the law and if you're going to uphold statutes and maxims, and if you just forget the law, if you're just going to be a human being, this is not the way you treat another person. This is not the way that you expect as human beings, as a civilization. This should not be, a reflection of how we've progressed as a community over the last couple of years. But yeah.
That's a great response. And we're going to come back to this. Actually, Isha, we're coming to you next. And for you, this is so real. Like your mentor, guide, this beautiful, inspirational woman, Sudha Bharadwaj, is still imprisoned. And we're not just talking about causes, right? And so the idea that this is not a reflection of progress is a nice insight to take away from you, Siddharth, because it's, so easy to jump into dehumanizing someone or something. Isha, would you like to talk about, to start with, one thing that you've learned from your line of work that you think everyone should know, and as we go along more expansively?
Yeah, I think one thing from which I've learned in last 7 years, and a lot of it comes from Sudha, who's been a mentor, who is right now in prison, is something which I feel in the lawyers community, somehow we forget the importance of community, of people coming together and fighting. And it's such an individual profession of a performance in court that we forget that there are things beyond that. And as a group, working as a collective for all the issues interpersonal issues that can arise, of course, in any situation, it still gives so much strength. And to work towards, when we're talking, because we're also not talking of one case, when you're talking imagining a different kind of a justice system, a criminal system, a larger things than when we imagine, there is a strength in working together. And that's something I learned from Sudha. That's how some of us got together. That's how we have worked for last 7 years. That's how we are trying to work on some of the issues in Bombay in last few months. And that's something which has come out during the CA protest. The young lawyers have coming together in different cities and actually addressing this as a community and not as individual. And I think that's something I've learned the beauty of it. Yeah.
That's a beautiful answer. What is life without communing? And the task of the point of community, community is what makes verbs possible. It makes justice possible. The minute you contemplate another human being and stuff. So what I have to echo what you're saying, Isha, because I feel great about the fact that this has given us an impetus to come together based on what we believe, right? We've had to exercise our choice in associating with another human being towards a common goal. It matters less and less what your isms might be, and it matters more and more whether you can be more humane every day a little bit and work together, whatever your circumstances are, to evolve a future which is more just. So I have to say I can't agree more with what you just said. So thanks for that. Sahana, what do you think you've learned over the last decade or so that you think everyone should know? And I'm particularly excited about hearing your answer because me, the first time of, there's been so many times you've inspired me. I think about what you did with SRE on campus, like understanding the limits of free speech within a college notice board, which was super gutsy, and it made us think about where we stand. In fifth year or sixth year, right after we graduated, you organized a festival of dissent called Kranti, which was a celebration of revolution, right? And you spoke about the what followed from that in terms of attention that was undesirable from the state apparatus. You've worked with 39A death row convicts here. So across all of these things, what is one thing that you think everyone should know?
I'd say many, many things. But one of the things that I think helps all of us remembering this, I think, which is to celebrate small victories. Because a lot of the things that we're working on are very, very difficult. Death row convicts will exist. There is no way the death penalty is getting abolished in the near future. Prisons are here to stay. We can only incrementally improve conditions, but it's always going to be incremental because it's a systemic issue. Judges are going to be hard to convince, and we're going to pick cases that are not easy. And of course, we do all of this without any grudge because it's what inspires us. We want to do this. But while we do this, I think the small victories that come our way, it could be a simple order that says, you can make a phone call to your client in prison during the lockdown. It may seem really simple and small, but it's worth celebrating because those are small things that help come together in the larger picture. And I think if we don't do that, then we're going to burn out or be disillusioned by the system, because all of that is very easy, very possible, and very human also.
Why should loving be so hard and tragic and painful all the time? What I'm taking from you, Sahana, is the idea that change is slow. So you have to brace yourself for the long run, and that's understandable.
And it's not like a sad thing. I'm just saying, celebrating the small victories that come our way, because I think, for me personally, at least, it's been the idea of victory when you're in college is so unrealistic, right? It's about winning the big case and overturning that complicated law. But we don't realize all the work that goes behind that moment in history when that change happens. And change is never an instantaneous process, as you all know. So and celebrating the small things that make that possibility come in the future. And this ties in with what Isha is saying also, that, the idea of a community is how you celebrate. How do you celebrate small victories? You do it with the people you work with, you work for, you work, with the people that you're celebrating. So
that's a great answer. And but there's only one thing I disagree with what you said, Sahana, which is that I think a decision is instantaneous, but a manifestation can be on a spectrum. The realization can be on a spectrum, and you can.
Sure, of course.
But shift is, of course, as you said, it's incremental. There's a difference from 0 to 1 to 1 to 2.
Yeah.
That's a step change. It's not really on a spectrum. Maybe it is. Maybe it's in decimal points sometimes, but an increment is an increment, right? It's no more.
Definitely. Yeah.
So you're actually giving me a great idea for the next question that I want to ask all of you. Kavya is likely to leave after this because she's always working and go in the direction of a rehearsal. She'll be with us as long as she can be. The question that I want to ask, inspired by what Sahana just said, is what is one small victory you would like to see policy-wise in the work that you encounter? And Kavya, we'll start with you, and you can pick art or disabilities. You have that latitude, or anything you want, really, because you can opine on anything. Yeah, we'll start with you and then hear what others have to say.
Yeah, I think the place I've thought about it most is disability. So I will respond from there. I think the thing I'd like to see most is uh, tax exemptions on assistive technologies. Right now, assistive technologies are still taxed at 22%. And it's a very specific thing, but it's really expensive. And it has real world ramifications for friends and people I know. And assistive technology in India is very expensive. It's hard to come by. And for some disability types, it's like life force things. Um, I have particularly my area of expertise is deaf blindness, is for people with hearing impairment and vision impairment. Helen Keller, obviously, is the most famous. You need a technology intervention for pretty much everything in the lives of deaf blindness. And till 2015, deaf blindness wasn't even recognized as a disability type. It only came with the newest Persons with Disabilities Act. So I feel like, particularly for deaf blindness, I think just protections around technology and ways to make accessibility a real part of the conversation. That would be.
That's a great answer. Spoken like someone who went to IIT, even if it is. So I don't know if everyone's seen your LinkedIn profile, so obviously we have embarrassing details without revealing the rest of it, which is that you went to the social science school. Anyway,
No, please reveal. I don't want any misconceptions.
it's okay. Conceptions and misconceptions are all welcome here. The world is full of lies anyway. It's all fiction. What's the point?
Yeah.
But Kavya, what a great answer, because often like policy changes are only known to. I mean, we have a loose conception of policy, but for you to say this tax is really hurting certain decisions and shaping the quality of your life is, I mean, it's like, this is the level of detail which matters. This is the level of the everyday, not we need to have more ramps on the streets, or so that was a really good answer, and we'll certainly examine this a little more. Like we can link the appropriate law and see what we can do in this direction. So thanks for that. And disabilities in the context of prisons is also very interesting, because there's a certain professor who's been imprisoned for a long while with no heed pay to their circumstances. And so we really have to ask the question of what is it about, like, I mean, what demands imprisonment? What is the specific freedom that needs to be curtailed under the circumstances for a state to be state-like as much as it could? I don't know. I mean, what I can't. It doesn't really make sense to me what interests are necessarily being preserved with behavior of this sort. So this is, I mean, that's the other reflection I have from your answer coming in from disability. Isha, what would you think is a policy change that it can be anything? Now you can say anything about any kind of policy. If you think like it should be about clinical education and law schools, or I mean, we can get into the kind of granularity that Kavya is inspiring for the rest of us. So pick whatever area. Close to prisons would be nice, but it doesn't necessarily have to be just there. Adjacent to it is always
Is
good.
abolishment of prison a small thing? No. So then
All answers are welcome. All answers are welcome. So please feel free to speak as freely as you can speak.
No, I don't know. Like, since the discussion is around prison, but I mean, prison can't be seen like a policy. Like, change within prison includes change within criminal justice system and who we are imprisoning and who we are sending it. The provisions of bail is very minute, and I think the way the courts are dealing with bails and not just during COVID, in general times, something which should be an exception has like something which should be a rule has become an exception, and I think we need to go back to that simple rule of giving bails, which is not happening. I've seen it in Chhattisgarh where the overcrowding is some 400% or something. That's one of the most overcrowded prisons in countries, where it's easier to get out of jail by a conviction or an acquittal than a bail than through bail provision. And it's heartbreaking to see when most of the people are inside for no reason, rhyme or reason. And after coming to Bombay, I've seen that situation is no better here than what was there as well when it comes to certain cases at least. And so yeah, I guess when you talk about prison, I think the criminal justice system, at least within a very minute area of the bail jurisprudence, needs to get better.
It is, and it is so relevant today, yesterday, day after tomorrow, every day. And bail is really the area of discretion, right? So it feels like a punishment before a punishment, and that doesn't seem fair. Just like speaking from a justice point of view, you shouldn't be punished like forever for the same crime, whether it's through surveillance or imprisonment, and needs to be as little as possible. Going back to what Siddharth was saying earlier. So it was a really lovely answer, Isha. Thanks for that. Sahana, what do you think? What do you think is a policy change you would like to see?
Many, but I'm going to stick to one for the purpose of this conversation on prisons. One thing that I've seen as a sort of outcome with the development in the death penalty jurisprudence in this country is this growing alternative of life without remission. So there was this decision of the Supreme Court in Sriharan where the Supreme Court has now given itself and the High Courts power to create a whole new kind of sentence, which could be 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, where it encroaches upon the state executive's power to grant remission. And what is the idea of remission? That given the fact that once you're convicted and you're in prison serving out your sentence, what is your behavior like? Are you reforming yourself? Reforming in the idea defined within the prison manual itself. Are you educating yourself? Are you helping others in the prison? Different things like that, which have come to form the idea of reformation, which is the point of imprisonment and punishment to begin with. All of that comes under remission. Now, without this power to remit, which is something that you can only determine if you're a prison officer who's overseeing this prisoner over a period of time, 15 years, 20 years in that prison. If you're not going to give that prison officer the power to decide if a person has reformed or not, and instead you're going to give that power to the High Court or the Supreme Court to decide at the time of imposing the punishment that the gravity of the offense was so terrible, we're not going to give the death penalty, but we're going to give a life sentence that's so long, so harsh, that there is no chance this person is ever going to come out of prison. And I think this is something that's now percolating to other places. It's coming into where governors and presidents are deciding mercy petitions, and they're coming up with very similar impositions of conditions of never allowing a person out, or remission powers are not being granted to the state executive. And prisons are a state subject. How a prisoner survives reforms, all of that is a state subject.
Sorry, Sahana, sorry to interrupt you. Can you just use words that can be used without context? Because
okay.
Most of us don't know what state subjects and other.
Can I explain that?
Please do.
Because I think this is coming from a sort of the idea of it being a policy change really is more to do with asking the Supreme Court to come a step back. And I say this because different issues in the Constitution are defined as under the central list, the state list, and a concurrent list. So these are the areas in which these particular governments have power to decide on certain things. So law and order, police, prisons are things that a state government can decide because that's under their jurisdiction, so to say. And something like the defense is something that the central government can decide because it has ramifications for the country. The way prisons in India are understood is that it comes under the state list. So every state has its own prison manual, rules, how they function, how they're supposed to determine the way prisoners' lives are led, how is remission granted. And remission, like I was explaining, is the calculation of all of this time that you earn while you're in prison doing all the different things that you do, which can then be deducted from your sentence and reduced from your sentence. And then you can be considered. It's not that you're going to be allowed out of prison after you serve that time, but you can be considered for release. So what I'm trying to say is that this is a power, what happens to a person post-conviction going into prison becomes a state subject. And increasingly what we've seen is that the power of the state's executive is being reduced on various issues, but very specifically within prisons. And this is happening, like I'm explaining in this whole situation of how you can be given a sentence of life without remission, where the state can never determine at any point of time in future if a person can be released. Because the Supreme Court, because of its decision in Sriharan, has said that the Supreme Court will decide how much time a person is going to spend in prison without the state's interference. I don't know if this is simplifying it enough, but just to say, a policy change I would like to see is for the state government to have the power to exercise the discretion. Much like in bail, a judge has the discretion to decide if a person is eligible for bail or not. Very similarly, at the time of sentence review, state executive must have the discretion to decide if a person can be released or not. And this is a very particular category of people who are convicted for life.
That's a beautiful answer, because it's also highlighting the possibility of the state sometimes acting without authority or information, or certain punishments being invented without deliberation.
This is the judiciary overstepping its power. That's what I want to say. This is really the judiciary deciding for itself, this is how we are going to determine punishment. Although
Right.
the criminal manual has various categories of punishment, and life without remission is not one of them.
Yeah, and it's such a, I mean, like, I'm finding it confusing, because on one hand, I'm saying, okay, it's nice that we don't have death, but if I had to choose between like death and 50 years in prison, I would pick death. Like,
And a lot of people would, or you may not be sure about what you would pick. So
Yeah.
part of my work with the death penalty clinic was to visit the people that we were representing on death row. And obviously, one of the questions we had to ask, given that Sriharan had been passed by then, is that this is a choice that the court may give us. Not necessarily. The court is not going to say, hey, do you want the death penalty or life without remission? But in the event that we want to steer our arguments a particular way, this is a possibility. Life without remission is a possibility. And a lot of people don't want that, because you know how your life in prison has been for 15 years, and maybe it's been okay, but imagining yourself die in prison is a very, very scary thought. So yeah, I mean, the move, and it's a trend that's seen everywhere, right? So the more you move away from the death penalty, you're going to look at harsher, longer sentences. That's like an unintended or intended, but sort of natural course of action. And that's something that it becomes very hard to then defend, because you don't want death, but you also know this is hard.
So what is your take on this, Sahana? Like, not in terms of the judiciary overstepping its powers. Which are the parts of it that you're not okay? One thing you've already identified is remission can never be taken away, because essentially you're saying someone is irredeemable. Maybe to the judiciary, it appears as though this is the same kind of irredeemability that death is, right? Like,
Yeah.
so maybe there's a certain equivalence which informed their imagination, which I think is mistaken, but at least there is some like connection that you can draw there. So one, you're saying that not taking away remission is not right. The other thing you're saying is that the judiciary shouldn't be with the one deciding if it shouldn't. I mean, in this case, am I right? Is there like
Yeah.
things,
That's right.
do you have any take on this in terms of punishment itself? Do you think like do you have anything else? So how do you feel about this punishment? Do you think it shouldn't exist at all? If you have to choose between banning the death penalty and this, if you ban the, how would you? It's not a this or that, but like, how do you think about banning the death penalty and banning?
I think underlying any kind of punishment has to be the genuine belief that punishment is reformative, right? The idea of saying, you don't impose death penalty because it's inevitable is one way of looking at it. But the other way of looking at it is that if there is a possibility, any possibility that a person can be reformed, then you don't kill that person, because that's an alternative that exists, right? And very similarly, the idea of a long sentence without ever being released is to say that this person is never going to be suitable to go back into society. So we're just going to keep them locked away. Again, you're sort of giving up the notion that there is any possibility of reformation. And that's not something that I think the criminal justice system should be built on. Right? If you don't have any possibility of redemption, if you don't have the possibility of saying reformation is something that we're going to engage with, then you're just going to end up having more and more people put into prison, and you're going to increase the number of people with no change. And this is going to not benefit anybody. And the idea of reformation is to also have people come back into society and be productive, because that person has a lot of different connections. It's not like you can cut that person away and okay, the cancer's out. This is a person who's going to be a father, a son, a great carpenter, so many different things, and you want all of that back. You don't want to impose this punishment on everybody else in his or her life, but it ends up being that. So I think it's not an either or, it's just an engagement with the idea of reformation. And if we were to engage with it, then we'd realize that life without remission and death penalty are equally placed. They're not alternatives.
Yeah. Oh man, that's so true. This it reminds me of what Siddharth was saying earlier about having to be humane. What I like about all your answers so far is that even when you're talking about imprisonment and prisons, we talk about how to do as little of it as necessary, right? We're not arguing against punishment. That is not what is happening here. Perhaps we could say that maybe nobody should ever be punished and you should have a purely reformatory process. In my ideal utopia, you'd only have an education process out of it. And honestly, the prison is meant to be in that direction, but the prison is also a place for cruelty to be expressed, not just like this positive application. But I just want to notice that we have to, when we talk about imprisonment, we have to talk about how to be as humane about it as possible, especially because it's an exercise of a violent kind of authority, right? It causes more damage than most other things. It's not like a fine. This is why you distinguish it. So the irredeemability has to be exercised very, very cautiously. And like death penalty and this life without remission seem like the worst kinds of irredeemability, right? Siddharth, what are your thoughts on this matter, on the policy change that you would like to see?
Yeah, so I agreed with what Isha and Sahana said in terms of their policy change, and in this field that's very crucial. Something that I think that should be an immediate policy change is something that Sahana brought up earlier. I think especially I'll give you some context and background into it. Since the start of the coronavirus pandemic in India, almost all jails across the country have been shut down completely. So there are no visits from members of the family. Advocates are not allowed to go to the jail. There are no external visits whatsoever. And that policy is probably going to continue in the coming months. And obviously there is a health and scientific reasoning behind continuing this particular policy. But in light of this particular policy, what government should be doing and what the prison departments, as long as the court should be ensuring, is to ensure that the prisoners have enough time to communicate with members of their family, either on the phone or through video conferencing, so that they are assured that their families are doing all right. They know they can see people, whether it's virtually or hear them over the phone. And it's really important to have that communication, especially if you're in a prison and in that particular setting. Because what happens, especially in this pandemic, what's happened, and it's happened all over the world, there have been riots in prisons. Because you're already cutting people off. These people are generally cut off from the world. You don't know what's going on outside usually. You don't have complete access to information. You have very limited access to information. There was a riot very early on in Dum Dum Central Prison, just close to Calcutta. And the Karnataka, the prison department has also highlighted to the court that there is a risk of a riot in prison. And one of the ways of reducing violence, riots, to ensure the mental health and stability of prisoners is to ensure that they communicate with their families. Because what's the current policy which exists at the moment is that you have one phone call which lasts about 3 minutes. You can't speak longer than 3 minutes over the phone, especially in Karnataka here. There are many people using that one particular phone facility. You need to pay for a phone card to use the phone facility. So if you do not have enough money, you're unable to make a call. And it's just just being humane to allow whoever the person may be to speak to members of their family, to ensure that they know everything's okay, to be assured, to feel that, there's someone looking out for them. And as a prisoner, that's incredibly important to know that at least somebody out there cares for you. Because if that doesn't happen, what you run the risk of, a person developing mental illnesses once they're in prisons, which is significantly high here in India. You also run the risk of that particular individual turning violent. And there are studies to show that, prisoners who don't have any sort of external visits from members of families or friends over a period of time really withdraw themselves, and, they kind of shut down completely. And so at this particular point of time, that's my opinion that, the courts as well as the government should ensure prisoners have access to communication facilities with members of their family as well as their advocates. It's incredibly important that advocates also be allowed to speak with their clients so that they know that, that they're doing all right.
That's a great response. And you need to be in the space of your healing, right? And if your healing is with your family, you need that. And if your healing is with your friends, your spouse, your advocates, you need, like, so you can bless you. And now saying bless you actually means bless you, because, like, let's hope there's nothing more than that. And it's nice that words take on the meaning that they were born with, and they can speak truth now. I feel like that's never happened before. Hey guys, I keep unmuting you because otherwise when you put yourself on gallery view, there's no difference between speaker view and gallery. So it's a bit sad for the viewers of this exercise. But so that point on communication, I think communication, communion, connection, healing is stuff that all three of you have been speaking about. So it's nice for that to be reiterated. I was about to ask you, what kind of things do you have access to, and you answered it yourself. So thanks for that. The next question that I want to ask the three of you here is about life inside prisons, right? Which is, so inside a prison, what are the things you would change, knowing what you know about prisons, to make it better? And you've already spoken of communication, you've already spoken of remission. If you want to get into greater detail, feel free to do so. But contemplate life inside a prison this time when you're trying to think about how this could evolve. So, okay, I didn't ask anyone. Sahana, because you muted yourself.
Okay. Given, and this question comes with the assumption that, of course, prison is a given and we're inside this prison. What are the things we like to see? I think a lot of small things. Actually, I don't think big things require so much thought. It's the small things. Things like the opportunity to work and keep yourself engaged. In Karnataka specifically, unless it's a central prison, there is no opportunity to work because district prisons and sub-jails and revenue prisons do not have the handloom, weaving machines or tailoring machines or carpentry machines.
The prisons came with these things. So perhaps, I'm sorry, so maybe you should describe what you know of these prisons, educate us, and then tell us what you would add. Because I know some of these things as quiz questions, but I really don't know what every prison looks like. The only notion I have of prison is this like strange panopticon view of like the world. This prison, which is a tool for eternal surveillance, is it like not all of prison as a real place. I know there's a bunch of concepts. I know it's a place for fear, sadness, violence, anger, like American movies, those kind of things, but really not enough about what it actually is like. So maybe you can tell us, all three of you could tell us about the prisons that you know of. I know there'll be too many to count, but just give us a flavor of it. And then tell us what you would like to add or subtract. What do you want more of and what do you want less of?
Shall I go?
Yeah. Yes, please.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. So what is a prison like? Depends on the size of a prison. And of course, a prison is all of the things that Badri has described, but also it's a world unto itself. It's a place where somebody who's been in prison lives. It's also their home. So if you are a small jail, if it is a small jail, which is a sub-jail, which is in the taluk, it has very few people, generally under trials, very few prison staff. So it's a very small building with, of course, cells or barracks. Barracks are big, large rooms where multiple people can stay. A cell is where you have one or two people. And a prison is a very regimented place. So you have a particular time when everybody wakes up, when everybody uses the loose, when everybody gets to pray or study, or when you get your food, when you go to work, everything is very regimented. Regimented by rules and also regimented by the number of staff that exists in a prison. So in a sub jail, which is where we still are, the staff is generally minimal. You don't have too many prison officers there. And that sort of ends up making it impossible for the prisoner to have much of a life, because it's easier for the prison staff to um, keep the person inside the barrack or inside the cell, which is a lock-up period, as opposed to giving them the chance to go out, because it's just one or two people. When there aren't enough guards, you can't let them out. So a sub jail is generally easy to control, small in size. District jail is, of course, where the district headquarters is, a little bit bigger, a little bit better equipped in terms of the kitchen being bigger, because it has to feed more people. You have a kitchen staff who will have to work, comes from within the prison community. You have more prison personnel, a little bit more leeway in terms of how much time you get to spend outside the prison cell or barrack. Maybe if it's in a district where there are opportunities like having a librarian come in, have teachers come in, there are these education courses that you can do. A lot of cities have NGOs that work in prisons, so they may come once in a while to, impart some skill development courses or adult education. So there's more to a prison than just sitting behind bars. There are many different activities that could happen, couldn't happen. It really depends on how equipped that prison is, how interested the prison staff are, how active the civil society is. So that's a district prison. Bigger than a sub jail, has more facilities, but not necessarily a universe unto itself, which is what a central prison is. Now, a central prison is huge generally, has workstations where people can do things like tailoring, carpentry work. They take on orders from government offices. So there's like full-scale work that can go on at the workstations. They will have a temple, they could have a mosque, they could have a church within that complex. They have so many prisoners that the kitchen is generally a huge enterprise with a lot of people working, and increasingly now a lot of modern machines that are being introduced in the kitchen. Bigger libraries, more access to books, more assorted prison staff. And by that I mean you will have an instructor coming, you will have a teacher who is appointed for the prison, you will have a small dispensary or a hospital within the prison. So really, as much as possible, a central jail tries to sort of be like a self-contained zone where much of what you would need happens inside of that prison. You could even have cultivation. So a lot of the central prisons in Karnataka have these areas called outlands where you have some cattle that are taken to be grazed, and people who come from an agriculture background, which is a huge proportion of the prison population, can grow things and do grow things. So a central prison is very much like a small little township, but a prison is also very much a school. So you also have these very rigid times when things happen. Discipline is a huge thing. Everybody enforces discipline. So there is all of that. So, I mean, this is like a very, very brief flavor of what prison life could be. And of course, different prisons, different flavors, each specific to itself. And I always feel like a prison is very much like this magnified glass put on society. So a lot of the issues, structural issues that exist outside get sort of amplified within a prison. So caste structure remains. So, but the person of a particular caste who's generally the one who cleans outside in his or her daily life ends up being the person who cleans the barrack within the prison also. So caste hierarchies remain entrenched. Money is a big deal, of course. The richer you are, the easier life is. Generally, that's the trend everywhere. Gender, female prisoners have far fewer rights than male prisoners in many different ways, because the idea is to keep the male and female prisoners segregated. And in that process, you end up having the female prisoners in this one particular corner of this big expanse of a central prison, with very little access to all the other things that are generally available to the male prisoners, including being able to go to the library every day, You can't go pick the book. The books will come to you in a cart. You take whatever comes your way. Simple things like that. So I'd say, and people with disability, prison is not a place where you're going to have special features for people with different abilities all that easily. So, a lot of the problems that exist outside society just get amplified within the prison. So, having said all of this, what is it that I feel needs to change, could make life in prison a little bit more bearable, would be opportunities to keep yourself engaged. Because
I think sorry. No, I was just about to say, Sahana, that I feel like your answer already answered what this question, because essentially this you need to focus on being actively engaged, and you can be actively engaged through your work or through education, and that's something that we need more and more of, because this is another aspect of humanity, say besides communication, that more people need. So I'll take that from your answer, and in the interest of brevity, so that we can get some more character to this question, I would suggest that we perhaps move on. We'll come back to this, because it really helped that your answer was also a lesson on what it actually is like. So I feel like maybe Siddharth and Isha don't need to recap all of it. I would be actually curious about other forms of imprisonment beyond the ones that you suggested, like political prisoners, regular prisoners, house arrest versus others. How do we think about how do we think about Kashmir right now, and the political leaders of Kashmir being in jail? How has it gotten normalized? It's not so much about how it's gotten normalized, but what is that prison like? So we're still speaking about prison life. So we're not judgmental, but we're just trying to understand how we can orient ourselves in a way that we can intervene meaningfully, how we can act meaningfully or form an opinion meaningfully from here. So shall we move on, Sana? Is there something else you want to add? Okay, cool. So Siddharth, what about you? I would invite you to talk about your work, the proposal that you shared, because I shared with Sahana and Isha. So actually, you can decide whether you want to come into it right now or you want to come into it a little later.
It's coming to me, and I think I found your question quite interesting, Badri. You know why? Because you said what changes that we'd like to see inside prison. Unfortunately, none of us, we may have visited or, spoke to clients, but none of us actually lived in prison, right? So none of us were, we don't have the, I would say, privilege to be an under trial or a convict over here, because then you actually understand what happens in prison and what doesn't happen, because you actually spend a night there, you live there. If anybody wants a good insight onto this, there's a wonderful book called Colors of the Cage by Arun Ferreira that talks about the regimental life, stuff like Sahana mentioned, about what happens in prison on a day-to-day basis. For in his particular case, he was kept in solitary confinement for most of the time, but he also observed, and he had a very keen eye in observing what was going on. Another book it's written from the perspective of a jailer, which recently came out. It's called Black Warrant. That can also, that's a little bit sensationalized, but it talks about what happens in a prison and the dynamics that goes into place on a regular basis. But yeah, talking about this from someone who's worked in the field and as an external point of view, I wouldn't really say I can, the best person to answer this question is a prisoner or an ex-convict or an under trial, not any of us. I'll be brutally honest, none of us. We could suggest cosmetic changes, but realistically, I don't think any of us are in a position to
absolutely
should be added or not. But I'd say that prisons need to be more open. If I were to sum it up in a sentence, they need to be more open. And it might sound quite funny, but what I mean by being open is that there are more. So at least people can. There are a couple of things. So the first thing is there are more interventions from civil society, members. That it's really lacking in India, quite lacking. You have something called the Board of Visitors, which is mainly more or less remained on paper, who come and do an external inspection of prisons. But there are many organizations, as they exist in many parts of the world, that could come in and help with regards to mental health, with regards to education, with regards to legal rights and awareness. And that's something that's really lacking. So if a greater civil society involvement in prison, it does exist. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. Groups like Isha's definitely do that kind of work, and it's wonderful. But on a pan-India level, it's very limited. And if you compare it to other countries, it's even more limited in terms of the access and reach that we have here. So I think that external involvement and public, participation in prisons. In terms of, just for example, something as simple as somebody going to do a conduct a course on art or workshop. If, for instance, Kavya's piece that she had earlier on, if this was done in a prison setting, that would cost so much. It would, mean a lot to the people within the prisons. Because a lot of them, every time they've tried workshops in theater and in music, you could see the most wonderful change that comes around in convicts and under trials. It helps with the mental health. It helps with them easing up, opening out. The amount of violent incidents is lower. So such kind of interventions, I feel, should be more and should be at a greater extent in India.
Right. And essentially, you're suggesting that it should be more easily possible to be connected to humaneness in a prison context. And that's a really good answer. So there's another thing that we spoke about. We'll come back to that in a bit. So Isha, what do you think should change? I mean, inside a prison of your choice. But I just want to acknowledge what Siddharth said earlier, which is how much ever we sit and talk about this, there is no prisoner who has access to this video right now. We are not even in a position to convey that this is what empathy for another human being looks like. Even if we, if we were to have any faith in someone's redemption, right, at all. So that's a super important point about I suppose the tragedy, but also the possibility of recognizing and noticing our freedom outside of the prison, both in terms of self-reflection, but also in terms of noticing that it's a place of great difficulty and great hardship, made worse by circumstances which don't have to be that way necessarily to punish, right? Sorry. Isha, I interrupted you once already. I wouldn't again.
No. So before going to the change, which will be from a more outside perspective, I would get into, I think we all know what the prison system, I would believe that this prison system structure needs to be dismantled and we need to come up with a new reformative system. So I won't go into the intricacies of what should happen inside to make life better. But first I'll talk of I would like to talk about the prisons that I've seen. So what we are actually talking about and how people I've seen see prisons as, which is another structure of oppression in places like Bastar, which is what I've seen. It's not reformation, it's not punishment, it's nothing of that sort. It's even as an under trial, like Bastar prisons, and I would like to give just an overview of what, at least the kind of prisons that is there, because Bastar prisons are most overcrowded prisons in the country, where imagine there was one prison, a district prison with 65 capacity of 65 people, and there were 250 people in jail at that point. Just to imagine how, we were being told that people were sleeping in ships. So these are the structures that we are talking about. To even think of what minute change can be done to make life better, I actually have nothing. It needs to go away. When we tried to point out towards the overcrowding in Bastar prisons, the state came up with, let's build more prisons. And that wasn't, again, the solution, because you will just arrest more people and pick more. The arrests are not stopping. Your use of prison to literally, because when you look at Bastar, everybody, the acquittal rate is 95% to 98% for certain districts. So you don't want people to, you're not thinking that, people will be punished and there'll be a justice for certain cases. You're using these prisons as your thing when you arrest certain people and put them, and that's where the point of political prisoners and all of that come. When you arrest people for certain, for resisting something, for fighting, or just existing in an area where there's an ongoing struggle going on, you are doing it just using that as a structure to keep them there, to dissociate them from their community and society and the struggle, and that is the punishment. So it's just a tool at this point more than anything else within a criminal justice system, at least, just like the courts were being used as a similar kind of tool of oppression. The prison was just as a continuation of that, is what I have seen. And that's because and it just the same thing that Siddharth said, we are seeing the lack of access of lawyers or to family members during the COVID times as an issue. And in Bastar, I saw that because these are people we are talking about. The prisons are so few and far between districts which are of the size of a state like Kerala. For family members to come and visit you means traveling across hundreds of kilometers sometimes and spending a lot of money, which basically ensures that people get entirely disconnected. For a lot of women prisoners that I've seen, and this is also a huge, like the average age of prisoners in Bastar prison was between 18 to 30 years old. So you're talking about young men who are being put up, totally disconnected from their family members, sometimes, and women, young men and women. And I've seen women who comes out, their family members have died, their husbands have moved on. Like there's suddenly this life that you can't go back to in many ways, and you have not been connected to. Some people who have been in prison for 7 years I met, who had not met their family members in years, whose lawyers had hardly met them in the first place, and now it's become worse in places like Bastar because now you have an NIA court to deal with UAPA cases. So somebody who is arrested in one district where the NIA court doesn't exist will be still arrested and imprisoned in a jail where the NIA court exists, which means some 200 kilometers away. So that means that whoever is arrested in a UAPA case in Bastar will hardly, at least if you don't belong to Bastar district, you won't be able to get to see your family members for the longest time. And so these are the prisons that I've seen. The torture, the violence inside, all of that is not very particular to it, but yes, there is a method particular to that space where the political prisoners or the prisoners, Adivasi prisoners there, which are the majority prisoners, are treated inside prisons or outside to it. That I guess is for another discussion. But for me, I think that I think it's very difficult to talk about what can be changed inside the prison for me. But what I can say is, I think what we need to do from outside is to also change how you view prisoners. I think that's something I'm seeing in COVID times more than I think it's becoming more that how even courts look at people who are inside. Like they're the most neglected ones. We don't care who they are. And there is a certain make of the prisoners in our country. These are the disadvantaged. These are a certain category of people who mostly are prisons. And and right now, like there is a bail order like this in High Court. Courts are rejecting bail, saying that it's okay if they're inside, it's safer for them and the society if they stay in. Something like that, you're not thinking of them as humans. You don't think they deserve the same rights as anybody outside deserves. Of, you're talking about rights outside for people, for different kinds of population. But prisoners is something we don't talk about as a society. We just shun them in this space and forget about their lives. And not everybody is a convict. We have a huge under trial population who has not been convicted of a crime, and somehow it's okay to treat them as somebody who don't exist in this world. Like they have no voting rights, they have no rights once they go inside. And I think that's just very frustrating, and we have to talk as a society. I think what to even think of a change outside, we need to look at punishment, how we look at prisons and prisoners, and somehow start a conversation again around that. Like somehow remind people that these are human beings that we are talking about at the end of the day, who are in the worst of conditions given the make of our prisons and how they are.
Yeah, that's a great answer. What I'm taking from it is that our ignorance almost of it is justified. We think we are justified in our ignorance of it because they have been condemned now. Like it feels like this condemnation is. It just keeps coming back to this irredeemability of the situation. So when you say it's the most neglected, it's also intentionally the most neglected. Like it's almost like in your list of priorities, you've decided it doesn't have to be in the drop-down menu, right? Because these are prisoners. Why should you think any more about them? So this ties in very nicely with the next question I'm going to ask all of you. Anisha, we'll start with you this time. On prisons and COVID, usually we never talk about the present in as much as we're not interested in the present. We're more interested in a way of being, so we're very interested in principles that we can gain from the present. We're not so interested in the facts of the present. But in the context of the prison, where I want to begin from is the thought that you sort of inspired in me, which is like when it's become a matter of life and death. How do you think about prisoners all over again? It's made the possibility of empathy somewhat slightly more likely than it was okay earlier. But even that has happened because I'm seeing a prisoner for the first time. I've studied law, right? If I don't have any encounter with a prison and I don't have any understanding of it, I can't imagine anyone having any idea of what the insides of it are like. So even this fact, whatever you've shared with us so far, has already, I would say, like done a lot of the work. It's a lot like the change.org petition in that there's no immediate consequence, but there is a certain orientation and alignment of intention which comes from noticing a part of the world that you had no access to. So that's really what I'm taking from what you're saying, Isha. So let me ask you all about how you think things have been during COVID. Pick your perspective, pick your context. We'll start with you, Isha. Please feel free to speak about. Please feel free to speak about your latest work, how it's going, and where you'd like to see it go. Let's tell us about a world where your petitions work, all of you. So, Isha, you first, and then what are the others?
The moment COVID happened, I think some of us, it wasn't just me, Sahana, Kritika, like there were some of us lawyers here and many around the country who knew that this was going to happen. An outbreak in prison is a fact that is going to happen eventually, which will be out of control if it happens again, given what we talked about, how these prisons are made. And so since the beginning, we at least the Supreme Court did take a notice of it. There was a step towards, also because of a lot of push from the civil society, from people who have been working, there was a order to form high-powered committee in each state to release the prisoners. This is also not just from, we have to take care of the prisoners, but also because it burdens the state's infrastructure, because if the outbreak actually happens, it's the responsibility of the state, and in a prison situation, it's not possible. Like if few prisoners gets it, there is a high likelihood of it passing around much easier than any other places outside of prison. And also we're talking of population who are old, who might be vulnerable, who are also impoverished given the situation that they are in. So they're also way more vulnerable to the consequences of a COVID-19 than maybe people outside of it in certain circumstances. And some of us have been writing letters to the high-powered committee for the release of prisoners, irrespective of the offences, because right now how the release is happening is they're deciding it on the basis of the offences that you're charged in, not even conviction, just if you're charged under a certain section or certain sections, you won't be given bail. You won't be released irrespective of your health condition, irrespective of your vulnerability, irrespective of your vulnerability to COVID-19. And that's something we've been trying to push. And that's something I think we need to talk about, because it's not a regular bail that we're talking about. COVID brings in itself a certain as I said, vulnerabilities which needs to be addressed in the prison. And that's something we have been trying to ask in terms of release of prisoners, that you cannot discriminate just because I am charged under a murder case or a UAPA case or Makoka, whatever. I can be condemned to death, basically. When you are saying that you won't release me, you are saying that you stay inside prison and you can die even of COVID or whatever the consequences of it, and we still won't release you, even though there is no chance. We are in a country under lockdown. Nobody is running away. Everybody is under certain kind of house arrest at this point. So it's not that state doesn't have a mechanism to ensure that whatever their fears are about releasing people cannot be taken away. So that's one in terms of release that one has been focusing on. And the second thing is Siddharth talked about communication for prisoners in jail, down to people who are left inside jail. The states are promising, say, Maharashtra like the Maharashtra state has promised to release 50% of the prisoners here, which has not happened. The prison authority, like the prison department, has been saying to release even more. They have actually, in a petition that we filed in the High Court, they've said that to even ensure social distancing or any kind of distancing as required under the guidelines, we need to empty the prison to 2/3 of its capacity. For that, it's not 50%, it's even higher than that to be able to have that kind of space between two individuals. And they said otherwise there is no way for us to control the situation. So the prisons are saying that the state is okay with releasing. Right now it's stuck at the court stage, where the courts are still, even people who qualify in the categories are not being released. They're still looking at the merit of the case. They're still looking at that. And so this, the Maharashtra prisons are still overcrowded. There have been like some 1,000-1,500 releases in last 20 days, a rate at which, and when we raised it in the High Court, the High Court has really not responded very positively. At this moment, we are hoping, because the final arguments haven't happened, but that's one of the things, to not look at merits. Just look at the qualifications, look at the vulnerability in terms of COVID and release it. And that's two main things, other than the condition within prisons: access to family members, access to money, giving them some stipend because the money orders aren't coming in, because they can't buy supplies, extra supplies that they maybe need to buy, even some independent assessment. There's no accountability right now. What is happening in prisons? Like, how many people are tested, how many are not tested? Are they, like, prisons are spaces where we know of human rights abuses happening even in regular circumstances. And right now, under lockdown, we have no idea how prisoners are being treated, how the discrimination is playing out inside the prison, because there is no accountability mechanism. There's no checks. Nobody's going, and I understand physical visits are not possible, but courts can come up with some reporting system, some video conferencing system. They have to come up with some accountability mechanism, especially right now when it's so strictly locked under a lockdown, because otherwise there's no way to know. And just like it happened that 3 prisoners died in Maharashtra, and we didn't even get to know for almost 2-3 weeks until we filed this petition and they filed a reply. When the first time outbreak happened and the news was reported, the family members panicked and protested outside the Arthur, not protested, but they reached outside Arthur prison, because it's not just panic inside, it's also panic for family members outside. So all the family members of all the prisoners, irrespective of somebody is positive or not, need to be told that their family member is okay. Because it's, the panic is also amongst the family members who are suddenly now reading these figures of outbreak in prisons and have no way to know if they are okay, if their family member is okay or not. Same for us lawyers, we have no way to know, because they have blocked all kind of information at this point. So we had to file this petition to actually figure what's happening, because otherwise there was no information outside. Yeah. I don't know what was the question. Sorry, I just.
See, if by the end of the answer you don't know what the question was, then you have answered the question correctly. That is the general rule of these conversations. But not to make light of it at all, Isha. This just that, like, already prisons are inhumane places, and like COVID has made everything more and more inhumane in some places and humane in some other places, right? It's been at its extremes. What I'm taking from you is, like, I'm wondering why we don't have force majeure clauses for justice if we have them for commercial contracts. It's like, it seems that we have to re-engage with our basic principles, right? I mean, a contract allows for it. It doesn't make sense that it wouldn't happen, or it doesn't happen with great urgency in the context of other areas of compromising liberty, right? Once again, you're not making the case for abolishing punishment. You're just saying we need to be as humane as we can be. And what you've been observing is clearly very inhumane. And the danger of areas getting infected rapidly is very significant. And you know, what was heartbreaking was the idea that someone is essentially being sent to death if the necessary arrangements are not made to secure their safety. And you know, I hope, at least inspired by the desire for self-preservation, we might see some more of this. You know, it'd be really sad if, like, prisons are closed off entirely if there is COVID. You know, I'm really scared of thinking about the possibility of a lockdown inside the lockdown. You know, inside the lockdown of a prison. What is the state really going to do? I wish, I mean, I didn't have to think twice about what to say. Do under the circumstances. Is the priority going to be to reorganize prisoners in another prison where they can continue to be unfree safely? Is the priority going to be to secure health, or is the priority going to be open up all prisons? There's some of these ideas which might be more humane than others, and the suggestion that we should be humane is something that I'm grateful for from you. Sahana, what about you? How do you feel about this post-COVID situation? I not in COVID situation. There is no post, ever again in our lives. Perhaps, I mean, let's hope for that. Like it, but yeah. So Sahana.
I mean, I think it's obviously again a situation that's brought to light the systemic problems that already exist, right? So prisons are a place where, because it's overcrowded, the spread of a disease is like that. It's quicker than it would be anywhere else.
Yeah.
So in any case, this is like the ideal situation for the virus. So there's all of that. There is that. There is also the fact that, like you're saying, prisons are always low on the priority list for the government to spend on. And within that, within the spending on prisons, spending on prisoners' health gets even less of a privilege, right? So it's not easy for a prisoner who is suffering from a heart disease to anyway get treatment in non-COVID situations, even though it's an imminent risk, because you need police escorts to take a person who is sick from the prison to a hospital and find a hospital that takes prisoners. And, it's a complicated thing which takes time. So when that's the problem with the medical benefits or facilities available to a prisoner in a non-disastrous situation, you can only imagine that it's going to get terrible here, and it has. It was really prisons are a ticking bomb for this virus, right? So there is that, which is one on the one hand. On the other hand, I know that there have been no great solutions for this situation, but just a small silver lining, I genuinely feel, is that courts have sort of taken cognizance. The Supreme Court did sort of on its own say, we need to figure this out. Ask the high courts to on their own figure it out. They had a committee that was set up. Now, how effective they are, how ineffective they are is clearly for all of us to see. It's not like they've been able to control things, but that's true outside of prisons as much as it is inside prisons. Can they be doing better? Definitely. But was this something that came from within the judiciary itself? Yes, it is. And that is saying something. But to me, actually, if I were to look at this judicial intervention in prisons, I feel that this is something that's, again, a very long existing tradition in India. We've always had the judiciary come in and say, the prisons are overcrowded. They don't have medical facilities. Under trials are a problem. They've always known the problems, and they've always had judgments and decisions and orders and said all the right things. But in effect, they don't get implemented. And that's, again, revealing. So although they rushed to the fore, they are entertaining petitions, the actual process of releasing people on bail, like Isha was pointing out, or the actual process of enabling distancing is not easy. And what does this tell us? It tells us that there are no simple solutions to this system, right? So you can't suddenly wake up and say, there's a pandemic, now let's figure this out. It's not going to happen that quickly. So I feel, and this is true of, prison reformation in general, where there is judicial intervention, it's very chaotic. And that's because every 5 years, the Supreme Court wakes up and says, let's study this, let's figure this out. There are multiple reports, there are many issues that have been outlined, but ultimately, if you're going to see the same thing over and over again, it's either systemic apathy or, I don't know what the alternative to that is. So that's one thing that this whole situation has really revealed to me, apart from all the immediate concerns that Isha is talking about, and of course we need to address them. If you would, to me, this is just how a system that's already messed up continues to be messed up, even with the best of interests from stakeholders. That's one thing. And the second thing that I feel, again, is monitoring systems. Like Siddharth was mentioning about how there is a board of visitors. Yes, it's in the prison manuals. It is supposed to have a lot of different stakeholders, not just the prison department, but it will also have a social worker. It will have the medical officers, different kinds of people with different interests. And that's the idea of having these oversight mechanisms where the prisoners feel free to express what they're going through, because a prison is in and of itself a closed system. So there is the institutional mechanism of abuse. Then you have all of these various UTRC, the Under Trial Review Committee. Then
sorry,
you have,
Sahana.
Sorry, am I going on and on? Hello? I can't hear you, Badri. Should I go on?
I mean, we can hear you. I can hear you.
You can? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you. I think Badri's must have lost connection.
Yeah.
Am I rambling? Then I can just stop and Siddharth can take over.
No, go on.
No, so
Badri is left.
Achha. No, I was just saying that, monitoring also, there seems to be already a lot of these monitoring, systems that exist on paper, but it just doesn't seem to be working. Things don't seem to be coming out. And, like Isha is saying, who is overseeing all of this? Again, with this whole pandemic, now you have a separate body entirely that's going to look at how the COVID release is going to happen. So you have UTRC, you have a BOV, you have this, and you have that. Then there is no coordination among them. So I guess a lot just slips through the system.
Hey, I'm back.
Yeah. We continue the conversation without you.
I'm very happy that you did. It's been going on for a long time without me, and that's perfect. I don't intend to damage that. I hope I'm not jumping in out of the blue, Sahana. I'll tell you where I lost you. You don't have to repeat yourself, but the point that I was taking away from you was twofold. One was first of all, you consider the appreciation for judicial intervention. So clearly, you acknowledge that an institution which appears broken a lot doesn't have to always be broken. It's fine for us to have qualified approval of good work, right? There's no reason why we should hesitate to appreciate it. The second thing that I took from what you were speaking of before I came is that, it's good, but this is not systematic. We keep going backwards. We don't have monitoring mechanisms. So what's really the point of the kind of interventions you're bringing in? I hope I didn't disturb the flow of the...
No. I wasn't saying there were no monitoring mechanisms. I'm saying there are too many. I'm saying there's just so much institutional oversight on paper that I think it becomes a situation where nobody's really taking responsibility. And therefore, a lot of things just slip.
Okay.
I don't know if this is part of the design and it's meant to be like this, or it's really something that we need to get our act together collectively as all different stakeholders.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you're saying all the right things and doing nothing.
That is a completely fair estimation of the situation. That's also that kind of life is far more comfortable. I don't know. For our generation, especially, it's confusing. Signaling virtue is far easier than living virtuously. So, I hope we don't have to be that way. Thanks for reminding us of that. Siddharth, what are your thoughts? We kept you last because you've also been working on a petition. It would be, I thought it would be cool to have Sahana's principal response bookended by Isha and yours live initiatives. Right? So it'd be lovely to for you to take us through your proposal. What you think should be done urgently within the prison context.
Yeah. Thanks, Badri. I think that Isha and Sahana both summed up the situation of what's being done on the ground. I just want to add one or two bits to it before talking about what we've been trying to do in a really small way here in Karnataka. One is that, there was the Supreme Court did take cognizance of this issue and they took it up. But then almost quite immediately, it kind of fell flat. I'll tell you why. That's because, different state governments may file submissions saying that they have zero COVID cases in prison. Some state governments had made a very ludicrous submission it's on record saying that they had zero overcrowding in prisons. And that's why it's not a concern whatsoever.
Sorry. No. I'm saying nobody even asked that. How could they make such a callous submission? But I suppose the state's legal team's capacity to stay strange things, both from the center and state, is
And it's a bit shocking, like Isha was talking about 400 people in, I don't know, just like numbers I can't even comprehend within the same space. So, I mean, I'm sorry for expressing my spontaneous disapproval at that fact, but please do go on.
Yeah. But a couple of other things that came out again from the different government submissions. One said that, even if we release the prisoners, transport them from the prisons to their district headquarters or their homes, would then again lead to, contamination and could lead to the spread of COVID. There was some, incredible arguments, which really, if you ask anybody with even a layman, would not really hold muster. But, the courts, I guess, took a back seat at that point of time. And that, I think, is the fundamental problem. I'm here in slightly disagreement with what Sahana says, because we've had a system of institutionalized injustice, especially of our justice system, where once you go to jail, it's if you to explain it very simply, the courts put you in jail. Okay, whether you're under trial or in a convict, you're convicted by a court, you're either sent to judicial custody or you serve out your sentence. And it is the court's responsibility, realistically speaking, to ensure that you're treated better. It's a judiciary's responsibility because you're in their custody to ensure that, in such, not even in COVID situations, but in general situations, you're treated in accordance with the Constitution, in accordance with your rights. But that's not happening. Right? So the multiple judgments like Sahana talks about, and when it comes to implementation, it falters. That's right. But in general, even in this particular situation, Isha had mentioned earlier on, some of the courts, and specifically I think the Bombay High Court at one instance had said that bail matters are not an urgent issue. We don't need to listen to this particular issue. It's not an urgent matter. That's not right. You don't need to tell anyone that what an urgent issue is and what it's not. The other issue is that it's impossible. In no way you can ensure social distancing in prison. You have to release at least, like Isha mentioned, 2/3 of the prisoners to ensure any semblance of social distancing. Okay, moreover, then to ensure that any sort of protocols are being followed, and that's not being done. Okay, so I'll give you the example of Karnataka. On the 19th of April, there was a submission to the High Court saying that around 1,108 prisoners were released, between the period of 23rd March to 19th of April. But in that same period, if you look at the numbers and a close examination of the numbers, 658 people went into prisons. Right? Either people who on their parole expired had come back in, there were people picked up for issues of violence, all sorts of things, lockdown violations. There were people arrested for lockdown violations and sent to prison. And that is a severe risk. You're bringing in people from outside. The prison departments across the country have come up with various protocols, saying if somebody comes from outside, you isolate them for a 14-day period in a separate block, and then you move them in. These look good on paper and they sound good, but if you realistically look at space constraints, overcrowding, it does just not work. The only way is to ensure that people are released in large numbers. And as Isha mentioned, unfortunately, the courts capped it. Okay, they said that only people of certain offenses and people serving sentences under, I think, 7 years can be released. And that's a very small, negligible number. Now, one thing that they could have brought in, I think what we were also trying to get in Karnataka, is to include convicts who are eligible for premature release. That also includes a sizable number. And I agree with Isha that offenses should not be a problem. They shouldn't really look into different offenses when they're looking at releasing people, because abroad in the United States and in multiple European countries, they've released a huge number of prisoners and to ensure that there is no widespread contamination in closed institutions and prisons in general. The other problem is that here there's been no attempt across India to identify vulnerable groups within prisons. So as we know, after multiple reports after reports, there are instances of people in prison having tuberculosis, HIV, people who test HIV positive, people who have other comorbidities like diabetes and other issues, who are very high, who are vulnerable and high risk. But neither the court nor the prison department has mandated anybody to ensure that such people are either released or kept in a separate enclosure. And that's something that they should be doing. And it's something that's incredibly important. But we also see there are cases at the national level that have got a lot of limelight. See the case of Safura Zargar. She comes under a vulnerable category. Okay, and for every one Safura Zarka that we know at a national level, there are several other pregnant women with and men, men who have pre-existing illnesses who need to be released, who need to get the support and care that they're supposed to get, but they're not getting because of, no initiative from the side of the judiciary or from the department in specific. So what we've been doing, I'll just sum it up very quickly, is that not just with COVID-19, but going forward, there needs to be a comprehensive disaster management plan for prisons. And this doesn't exist. It's very surprising. It doesn't exist anywhere in India. We don't have any sort of system in that particular, that looks into this. And in India, it's such a diverse country that the types of disaster, the natural disasters that strike in different areas are quite different. There could be floods in one zone. There could be, a severe drought condition in another area. And a comprehensive plan needs to be worked out at an all India level and at a state level. Though the states come under a state list, these closed institutions are particularly susceptible to natural disasters. And if nobody works that out, and if there's no involvement and initiative from the state side, COVID-19 is not the only thing that will affect prisons. There could be future pandemics, there could be earthquakes, there could be floods. And in India, in the last couple of years, these have happened. But if you don't have a disaster management plan dealing with prisons at different levels, it becomes incredibly complicated, because then you're deliberately showing to everybody else these people don't matter. If they do die, it's collateral damage. It doesn't matter. We can figure it out as and when it happens. That should not be the case. There should be, going forward, COVID should be an example to evolve a comprehensive disaster management plan for different prisons. And it's something that we're hoping to explore. But let's see what happens.
No, we have to, and we will. There's no question about it. And we need a version of this, right? Like, what I took from what you said just now, Siddharth, and I think we can close with this, a little over time, is, of course, we can continue forever as well, but this conversation is not over. This is just a point of departure, not a point of arrival. So what I took from you was this institutionalization of injustice, and it's not right, because you're trying to do more justice, and if you're institutionalizing injustice in your desire to do more justice, it just feels like that's not the way to do it. So COVID has made the imperative for justice more and more obvious and immediate. So the need for a disaster relief plan around prisons is extremely urgent. So no question about it. I think it needs to have the feature that all of you have described so far. This is also an opportunity to push an agenda for humaneness, right? Outside of just what you need. Because one of the earliest things that a dear doctor friend of mine told me when COVID struck was, now is the time to regain long-term immunity, which means reduce the amount of stress that you have in your life, right? Like diabetes and heart conditions are so linked to your mental state. And it's not the only one. It's undeniable medically, scientifically, the relationship between your mental state and your physical body. So, we know that most diseases, most conditions have a psychosomatic aspiration to them. So it's impossible to not look at mental health. So the agenda for humaneness through work, education, access to bail, all of these things, I think need to be a part of this agenda, because COVID is a reminder for what is important to all of us right now. And what is important here today is the fact that this exercise, as we said earlier, is meant to be public media. It doesn't cost much to host these. So we don't want to look at this as a money-making exercise, obviously. So the aspiration is that people can engage in small acts of kindness, donate whatever they could towards this direction. We invite you to contribute what you can. So that's about it from my side as such. If you have one parting sentences or a few parting words for our viewers, feel free to say bye. Sahana, Siddharth, Isha, one by one, and then we can all say bye.
Nothing really. I think I like how Siddharth sort of ended this on hopefully a hopeful note of the way forward, that we really need to take from this whole situation the fact that prisons are particularly differently vulnerable, and that we need to have a plan in place. And I'm sure there will be takers for this from all the prison authorities, because at the end of the day, just one thing that I think we didn't really bring up is that prison officers, prison guards have a very, very, very difficult life. they do very, very important work, and they're just implementing a lot of things from outside, but they're as secluded as the prisoners themselves. And any and on help from outside is something that could help them also. So yeah, I mean, good luck to you, Siddharth, and if we can help you in any way, please, would love
Hey,
to
we
pitch
can't
in.
help each other, and we must help each other, and that's the point of these conversations, right? Like, let's figure out how we can be useful to each other. There's like our intentions coming together. Those who are watching, participating, it's really a matter of aligning our intentions, because magic can happen if you commune, as Isha was saying earlier. So that's really the aspiration. So that last thoughts, last words.
I mean, I'm glad that we had this opportunity to interact with everyone from across the field. I think, yeah, just going forward, it's great to have such conversations. I think we should continue the spirit, whether there's COVID lockdown or no lockdown, continue to engage with people from across different fields and to discuss. It's great. This particular conversation has, given me a few more ideas going forward. I'm looking forward to working with everyone here. Thank you.
Hey, that's nice. You're welcome here. Isha, how to say bye to everyone?
Yeah, I think it was a lovely conversation. And yes, do definitely tell Siddharth whatever we can do. So it's on a side note from here. But in continuing to what we talked about, and as like on this platform also, and in general, I think we just need to revive conversation around prisons more. I think in that pandemic that has happened a bit, a lot more than we were doing before. But not just prison crime and the idea of punishment and all. I think we need to have I wouldn't say movement or maybe a movement, but we need to have like a very active conversation around that and allow like just on the longer run. I think we need that. We need to do that again.
Yeah, that's right. And come together right now over me. That's what the Beatles said. That's what we say as well. Thank you all for joining us tonight. It's been a
Thank you,
wonderful
Badri, for
conversation.
doing this.
And
It's not an easy thing to put together these talks every other day, but thank
what
you
can
for
I do
doing
when
it.
so many amazing people around me? It feels like, how could we not, And it's very generous of you to offer your time at such short notice. It's very kind of you. It must have helped, I think, and we're quite proud of the fact that these are not conversations that we ever want you to prepare for, right? These are things that clearly you've done all your lives and you have careful, considered opinions about them. So we are very grateful that you shared parts of yourself with us and parts of your life's work with us. So thanks, Sahana. And yeah, let me end this conversation on that note.